Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the town board meeting of Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. I think, is this our first full town board meeting in September or no?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it is.
She says yes.
So yes, okay, so welcome. Happy unofficial fall, everybody. So can I please have a motion to open the meeting?
Motion to open the meeting. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are going to start with any announcements. I don't have anything from the supervisor's report. It'll all be in the newsletter that comes out tomorrow. We did have a number of community corner things just because we haven't had a meeting in a while. I just wanted to wish a happy 4th birthday to Bo Hani, a happy 6th birthday to Bora Yurtsever. Congratulations to our very own town administrator Jill Shapiro for becoming a grandmother. Yay. Happy 13th birthday to Layla Seto. Welcome to the teen years. Be nice to your parents. Happy 30th birthday to the Chappaqua School Foundation. Happy birthday to our state assemblyman Chris Burdick. Happy 6th birthday to Ella Levy and happy 4th birthday to Ben Levy. So we can't put your names up on the sign, but we want to wish you a happy birthday, and it is all be in the newsletter as well. Anything from the town administrator's report, Lauren?
Just wanted to announce that school tax bills have been mailed, so they should have hit your mailboxes by now. If not, you can always give the town clerk's office a call. We're happy to provide you another bill if you need, and just a reminder, they're due September 30th. Thank you.
And just as a reminder for those who are worried about paying it on time, you can also post date checks, so you can date a check for September 30th or 29th and hand it in now so there's no chance that it doesn't get to us on time. All right, any public comment, new business? We have a number of public hearings today. This is not with regard to those public hearings, this is just general public comment or new business. If there's anyone who has anything they wanted to bring up. All right, no one here. Is there anyone online? Did you say no? Okay, all right, thank you. So then we are gonna move right ahead. Also I want to say hello to Eric Gordon, who's sitting in from Keenan Bean as our town attorney today. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
So we're gonna move right to our public hearings. The first one, if I can have a motion to open, it is regard to the King Greeley Sanitary Sewer District Extension for 236 Bedford Road. If I could have a motion to open that public hearing.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Eric, do you wanna tell us a little bit about what that is?
Right, this is an extension of the sewer district that's based on an application by residents Amanda and Mark Garfinkel, extended to include the 236 Bedford Road property, their property, so that they can join the sewer district. So that's basically what we have in the public hearing is the cost of it would be $42,500, which would be covered all by the Garfinkels, so there would be no cost to the town by the extension.
Right.
And they would be
That's
responsible
important.
for the extension for the connection fees as well.
So it doesn't cost the town any additional
Yes, there's
money?
no additional cost, it's all on them for the cost of the construction and connecting to the sewer district.
Okay, perfect. And do they need to provide a bond to open up the street?
Yes, they'll have to get a bond for a public improvement bond from the DPW department for that, so.
Okay. All right, does anyone on the town board have any questions about this before we open this up for public comment? No. Okay, does anyone have any comments on this local law? This public hearing? Anyone in person? Okay, is there anyone on line? All right. So if there are no questions and no comments, I would propose that we close the public hearing. And I don't think we need to leave it open for written comments. I don't really anticipate any. So can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
I move to close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. And now we're going to entertain a public hearing for a local law concerning the acceptance and use of donations by the Newcastle Parks and Recreation Commission. Can I have a motion to open that public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So if everyone will recall, this was will allow us to have kind of a fundraising body through the Rec and Parks Department. Eric, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, it's just some relatively minor changes to the law. You had stated the purpose, but it's that neither the commission nor the town or its employees may extend the monies to solicit such donations, but was the primary change to the law itself, so.
Okay, perfect. And we had talked about this a few weeks ago, if everyone remembers. It is a vehicle where they can now utilize it to raise money for certain projects through the Rec and Parks Department. And it's in coordination with Westchester County, I believe. So does anyone on the town board have any questions or comments?
I'm just really excited that we're doing this.
Okay, good. So any public comment from anybody here in the audience? All right. Any public comment from anyone online?
No hands are raised.
Okay. So in that case, I would again request a motion to close the public hearing. I don't believe we need to hold it open for written comments. So if someone can make that motion.
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. So now we're moving on. I know you're all waiting here with bated breath. We're gonna move on to the public hearing for the net zero carbon legislation for 50 North Greeley. Can I have a motion to open that public hearing?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So as many of you recall, this is not a new public hearing. This is a continuation of a public hearing that we have been holding for months now, I wanna say, regarding legislation with respect to 50 North Greeley Avenue. We are gonna continue both our discussion and the public comment period on this today. Before we get started on that, is there anything, Eric, you wanted to add on this?
No, not at this time, thanks.
Okay. So before we move to the public comment portion, are there any questions? I know I had one, but are there any questions that anyone on the town board has before we get started? All right. So one of the things I wanted to bring up, and we do listen to your public comments as you're here, and we also read all the public comments that come in online, either directly to the town board or to public comment at mynewcastle.org. We do read and consider everything that comes in. So there was a letter that was recently sent in, I think I have a copy here somewhere, by the group Residents United to Save the Chappaqua Hamlet. And it was a good letter. And I thought that was something that we should publicly talk about because some of these are issues that we hadn't heard before. So I wanted to make sure that that the applicant had the chance to address that. And we also have Sabrina Charney Hull is on up there on Zoom on the big screen. So if there's anything also that you want to add, that would be helpful. So I see Nanette here. If you want to come up, I think you've received a copy of this letter.
Yes.
Correct? So if you wanted to address the issues in that letter, I think that would be helpful for the board.
Sure. I looked through the letter and there were three issues that were brought up. And the first issue had to do with environmental contamination. And what was included in the letter was recognized the need to conduct an assessment of the site. And as I mentioned the other night, we actually did that. So when you do an environmental assessment of the site, that's really done in three phases. The first phase is called a phase 1 review, and it's really a document search on how the property was used historically. And the second is and there's usually a walkover. If as part of that review of the history of the site, you find out that there were uses on the site that had the potential for contaminating and creating issues having to do with groundwater, soils, or whatever, then you then need to do what's called a phase 2, and that is to do some sampling of the site. And the third phase is if you actually find something that has been found to be contaminated, you need to have a remediation plan. And so what was discussed in the Rush letter is actually what we are in the process of doing. So in September of 2022, we did a phase 1 study that looked at the uses on the site going back to, I think, like 1870 up to the present use. And what was found, and it also looked at, paid attention to not only the soils, but groundwater, particularly paid particular attention to upgradient uses surrounding the site in case that there was migration of toxic chemicals. And what was found is that there really is nothing that is obviously contaminated on the site. That being said, because there were former uses that included a freight house and a woodworking as well as lumber storage, the recommendation in the phase 1 is that a phase 2 be conducted at the appropriate time, where there be sampling of the site to ascertain whether or not any of those previous uses, which have a history of potentially causing problems, are actually there. And if those contaminants are found, then there would be a phase 3 conducted that would be part of a remediation plan. So what was said in the Rush letter is actually correct, and we are proceeding as they have recommended. And I don't think there was anything that was included in that letter that isn't already addressed in our phase 1.
So let me just ask you a quick question about that. So any building on the site couldn't commence until remediation to any soil on the property was done, if that's necessary, correct?
Right, my understanding is that in order to get financing for a building, the financial institution that provides that requires that the site be clean.
Okay, and this is something that you couldn't, the DEC would be involved if there was an issue, and so it's not something that can be kind of glossed over. It would be known and have to be remediated, which is actually good for the town anyway to
So
remediate.
can I ask you also something that you didn't mention? It looked like in 1960, a fuel company bought the site and used it as a fuel oil tank farm. So you didn't mention that, you mentioned something about a lumber.
That was in the letter.
So that was, is that part of your
Yeah,
research?
you know,
Did it reveal
I
that?
looked at that and it wasn't clear that that was on the site. The fuel, there are fuel storage tanks that have been noted throughout the area. And matter of fact, part of the documentary search is to go through a whole number of agencies that maintain documents concerning uses, tank storage, spills, and that wasn't particularly noted as having an open spill or a.
Sorry, that may have been 54 Hunts Place.
I'm sorry?
That may have been 54 Hunts Place. I think I'm reading something that has to do with 54 Hunts Place and I
Right.
didn't realize it, yeah.
Which was a brownfield site, and
Exactly,
we
yeah.
knew that, and that needed to
Right.
be significantly remediated
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking
before.
at a list of bullet points and I didn't realize that had to do with.
So
Hunts Place, right.
54 Hunts Place is included in our study. As well, it was referenced appropriately in the Rush study.
Right, but it's not too far away.
It's not too far away, and the conclusion that was made was that it is far enough, number one.
It is on the other side of the train tracks,
Yeah,
though, also.
there was a remediation plan. It is being monitored, I believe, as we
It is.
speak. And that there is no suggestion that there's any contamination from that has affected this site. That being said, when the phase 2 is done, that determination will be made, and if additional cleanup is necessary, that will
You'll do
be
it.
done at that time.
And who's doing that study? The examination?
The developer for the 50 North Greeley site.
So it's not being done independently?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's being done by an independent and licensed environmental consulting firm. It is being done by PVE Lawrence Environmental Consultants, and the study is being done in accordance with the state law for doing environmental assessments. So there's a very very specific procedure that needs to be followed, and these studies need to follow the state law.
But the applicant pays for that.
Absolutely.
Do we have an idea of when phase 2 will be complete, when we'll have clarity on this?
Well, the phase 2 would be, once you start disturbing the site, that's when you wanna do a phase 2, because you'd be looking for not only, right now you really can't see anything on the site because it's completely covered.
Right.
So once you start disturbing the site, you would look for staining on the soils, you would look for any indications that there's a problem. You'd look at any potential underground tanks that were not listed on the DEC tank list, but are there. And it's all part of the phase 2.
So let me ask for counsel, just so the public can understand and we can be sure that we're saying this correctly. In terms of a negative declaration, as long as this first step is identified, meaning is there anything in the record, for example, about contamination, that would satisfy that phase 1 for the purpose of our determination. If in the event, once that determination is made, at phase 2, when the ground gets disturbed and there's an oil tank making this up, that still would have to be remediated. The project could not go forward until it was cleaned. But we wouldn't get there, and nor is that part of our analysis at this point right now.
Right, that is correct. If the phase 1 does not specifically indicate a definitive concern, a definitive substantial adverse impact, then for secret purposes, that is sufficient. But as the project goes forward and there is additional, if there's anything discovered, that would 100% have to be remedied before the project can go forward. But for secret purposes, the phase 1 is typically sufficient, unless it's indicative of some other operations on the site that require an actual
And
phase
to
2.
be clear, right now, we're just dealing with secret, we're not dealing with that next step.
Right, exactly.
So to state it even further, you would need a building permit. And then when it starts, because that would preempt disturbing the site. And then if something was discovered, there would be a stop on building until everything's remediated.
100%. If they discovered oil or any type of tank or any kind of spill in that soil, everything would have to stop until that is cleaned up. That is correct.
And similarly, not to just go too much off the rails here, but we discussed issues with the fire department that they have raised. That's not, and legitimate concerns about access from the street and parking from the street and ladders. That's an issue that ultimately the building inspector, before a C of O is given in the site plan, that would be dealt with. That's not a secret issue.
That's typically on the building permit phase as well, as long as there's no, danger, as long as the fire department doesn't feel there's a danger to the public with respect to that issue, that it can be resolved. And the building department has determined it can be resolved through the building design phase. That's correct.
Site plan phase.
Right, the site plan and building design phase, correct.
And if I can add, one of the other items that was included in the Rush letter had to do with the potential for migration of contaminated soils and water going into sensitive water bodies. And if we don't think there's anything on the site, but if there is something off-site that's migrating through the site, that's happening anyway, that's happening today. And if you want to mitigate that and stop that, having this more detailed site assessment and any potential remediation would do that.
Thanks.
So the next item had to do with what the community sees may not be what it actually gets for 50 North Greeley. And I think the beauty of the special permit is that it's not as of right, it's within your control. And so when you look at the site plan and you look at the architectural features and details, you will be able to see exactly what you're getting and include that in your resolution, so that if there is a deviation to what you've seen and what you approve as part of the special permit, they would be in violation of the special permit, and you would pull it. You have that control. It's
So you're talking about passing the legislation in conjunction with the site planning.
That's right, that's what your
Right.
special
I
permit
just want
does.
everyone
No, she's talking about
to
we would pass
understand.
the legislation and then go to site plan, which the town board needs to also approve site plan,
But we could also do it the other way.
but we didn't.
You can, if I may, you can attach the architecturals, the drawings to your legislation as part of your approvals. And then that way, if the site plan that comes in does not include the architecturals that you have approved or are attached to the special permit approval, the legislative approvals, you can deny it.
Okay,
Okay, yeah, thank you.
that's helpful, thank you.
And the third thing had to do with traffic. And my understanding, and I will defer to your counsel, is that we used valid traffic data that seeker, and I think there's case law concluding that if there is properly conducted analyses and raw data used, that is applicable and acceptable for seeker. And you as the town, I mean, you've hired your own consultants to review the work that we did. And you know, we used what was available and conducted an adequate study. And you know, similar to the existing conditions on the site, there is already a 9,000 square foot building that is, as of right, could have a retail use that would generate, you know, 45 trips without your review or without any changes, improvements, mitigation to the hamlet. So I don't know what else I've missed in addressing the rush letter. Anything else?
I think those were the three main issues
Okay.
over there. Does anyone have any questions?
No, but that was very helpful. Thank you for addressing it.
Alright, thank you.
If I may come up and speak.
Hang on, you can be the first one coming up, I promise. There are cards up here, by the way, if anyone does wanna speak, please put your name on a card and hand them over to Jill or Lauren and they'll pass those up. I just wanted to see if there was anything else the town board wanted to address or discuss before we move to public comment.
Don't let him tell you.
No, I don't have anything at this time. I would like to hear the public comments and then maybe we'll have another opportunity to do that.
Okay. Maggie, did you fill out a card?
Maybe first.
Alright, Suzanne.
Maggie, go first. I defer to Maggie. She's filling it out.
Don't you have to get front seats, back seats from all the people in front?
Yes, thank you. I'll fill them out for Maggie.
Okay, all right, since, you know, I was unaware that this presentation would be made by the developer's representative addressing our letter. I had written comments, but now I'm trashing them and I'm gonna just have to do it off the cuff. First of all, yes, there were 3 basic points in that letter, and the first one had to do with a number of topics, not just contamination. But prior to that, you know, I did not see any mention of contamination issues in any document. So I don't know where all this information was, but this was, well, I wanna start with, all those comments came from the community. The community's now talking in terms of seeker. They're not going up and saying, I have something I want you to say at the time that they get to the seeker process. But over the past 6 months, I've talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of residents, and they've come up to me and said, what is the town doing about this? What is the town saying about this? Have they looked at this? What's their solution? And 2 residents brought up the long rumored contamination in that area and asked me what the town was doing about it. That's where it came to my attention, 2 longtime residents. And I saw nothing. So all this information that's coming out is news to me, so I know there was a reference to it at the work session, but that's the first I ever heard that there's any studies done.
I think it's good though, that to bring it up, if there actually is a like right now, even if it's contaminated, nothing would be done the way it is now. So I think it's actually good that once the land is disturbed, if there is contamination, it's actually a way to get it cleaned up.
Of course, people knowing about it and having it out there, if it exists, is better than not having it out there, of course. But what I'm saying is, I see, I see what's happening over the summer, and then the negative declaration draft comes out on September 1, right before the Labor Day weekend. And, we have to, we scrambled to get a letter in, but really all the comments in that letter come from people in the community. And by the way, there's comments coming about parking and some other comments that I could not get done by the 5th. There's a follow-up on the first point, which goes to flooding. I mean, it wasn't just contamination, there's also flooding. The document says it's not in a floodplain. This hydrologist with 42 years experience who walked along the property and did a detailed study and created very careful maps, shows it's in a floodplain. Now, that's a relevant topic, it's addressed in the negative declaration, so obviously it's relevant, but it says there's no problem. So I'm saying you now have an expert report that establishes on that issue that it's not complete. And
So
I didn't
can
hear
ask a
any
question
mention of
about
that.
And I wanna address this to council also. So if it is in a floodplain, it's in the floodplain now, so is the building of like my understanding of the way SECR works is this proposed project going to adversely affect the environmental conditions that currently exist? So if it's in a floodplain now, it's gonna be in a floodplain later, right? Assuming it is, I don't know, but how would that adversely affect SECR? Even if that was possible.
I mean, I think there are different design standards that have to be met if it's in a floodplain or not in a floodplain. I'd defer to the planning director if that does have any impact with respect to the analysis under SECR and whether there's a substantial adverse impact. I think we have a finding that it's not in a floodplain, that there's another expert saying, but there are set standards for how that's determined, and if one expert disagrees, that does not necessarily create an issue under SECR. Is the other question, so.
Did you hire an outside consultant to look at it, whether it's in a floodplain?
Do we want Sabrina to
So
weigh in?
Sabrina, do you have thoughts?
We relied on our mapping and the applicant's mapping. We verified it and, it's in I don't have that resource in front of me right now. I'd have to go back and look at it. But I'm not prepared to enter into a discussion tonight as to whether or not it's in or outside of a floodplain.
But it was addressed in the proposed negative declaration in the environmental.
Correct, and as council advised, that if it's in the floodplain, it's a different type of construction. To ensure that that there's no impact to flooding.
No additional stormwater impact.
But we analyzed that already and decided it was not, correct?
But you're saying it's not in a floodplain.
Okay.
No, I just wanna clarify this, because Lisa, I hear your recap of it, but it's not what I'm hearing from Sabrina and our lawyer. So right now, I'm hearing there's a factual difference of opinion. One person is saying it's in a floodplain, Sabrina is saying she's not quite sure at this time, not prepared to say right now, which is fair. And our attorney here is saying that if it is in a floodplain, we have to deal with a different design standard and different construction. So I just wanna establish that that's where we are on this issue.
Let me just jump in 1 second before Sabrina responds. My understanding is a little different. That Sabrina will answer obviously, but there's already been this determination that it's not in a floodplain.
Right.
Period. And you can find something else. And if
It is not within the 500-year flood zone or the 100-year flood zone. That is what the conclusion has been. So FEMA regulates the flood zones. There's a 500-year flood line and a 100-year flood line. It is not within those two flood lines. There may be historical flooding outside of this site, given the drainage that we have seen historically. The town undertook a project to improve the drainage on North Greeley Avenue, particularly in relation to this site and the area in proximity to this site. The improvements that were made do reduce the amount of flooding in that area. And, but it is not within the 500 or the 100-year floodplain in accordance with FEMA's mapping.
So FEMA's
thank you.
floodplain ends, the 500-year floodplains at the dividing line between the Pocket Park and Susan Lawrence lot. Okay, that's where it ends, right, as my recollection is. Obviously, that's 20 feet from the property. Number one, it was explained to me that these are obviously, these are not brick walls, that's 20 feet or 40 feet, something like that from 50 North Greeley. But this expert, who's a hydrologist with extensive experience, came here and walked along the property and did all these studies. And he did look at a pipe that was part of the upgrade, and he said it's too narrow a pipe, I'm really paraphrasing, to effectively drain the quantity of water that it can accumulate there, and that's at the northern tip of 50 North Greeley. And aside from that, he said 50 North Greeley based topographically is like a bathtub. Now, I have a further report coming from him. It will be in within the week to further explain his point on flooding. Okay, so that is coming.
But Maggie, we did have, when we did the street, upgrade and infrastructure project, we had engineers, hydrologists, we had a lot of people looking at this and so somebody just coming in now looking at that, to me, is not that telling. When we had significant people doing
I'm
that,
not
and
sitting
then
on the
realistically, just looking at it, when we've had terrible rains, it has not flooded when historically, before this infrastructure project was done, it had, and there were.
It might improve the flooding potential, but at what was it, Hurricane Ida, whatever it was, I think that was, I'm not sure. People in the downtown, there were images of the waters reaching the intersection at North Greeley. Another bit of rain and it would have been up North Greeley. So you're going to do with this information what you will. But I every comment in that letter came from concerns raised by residents, and I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of them, all right? So we went to the trouble and expense of hiring somebody who knows this stuff, and you're gonna do with it what you will. But a further report is coming to further explain the flooding issue. I can't require you to give effect to his recommendation, which is that there should be that alone has a moderate to significant likelihood of impact, and it warrants an environmental impact statement. But that report will come in shortly, okay?
Okay, before you continue, Maggie, I want to stay with the floodplain issue. Sabrina, I'm sorry to belabor this point. I heard you say you were not prepared to say, but you did say that it's not within the 500-year or the 100-year line. So I just want to be clear, are you prepared to say without a doubt that this is not within the floodplain? Or are you not quite
Based on
sure?
the FEMA mapping and the analysis that has been done to date, provided by the applicant and verified by my office, it is not within the 500-year flood zone or the 100-year flood zone.
Is that the standard that we're looking at?
That is the standard that is used when we do our secret analysis.
Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to go to the second point, and that is about the community may not get what it sees. Eric, may I ask you, the law passes, the law is in effect, there are no, other than the design conditions, which are very few, specified in the law, the day the law is in effect, those are the legally required design conditions, correct? What's in the law? There's no permit, there's no special permit application pending, it's just the law.
The law has its parameters.
Right,
as
no
to what-
windows
what's
on the train
required.
side, the
Right.
street wall has to be in and out, in and out.
Right.
The ground floor has to be a certain distance off the street, a few others, okay? There's gotta be some open space above, but the open space above criteria is very vague. So it's what the law says, right? right? The concept plan says something different.
I'm not here to be cross-examined.
No, I'm
so
just
not
trying to
gonna-
understand.
I'm not gonna answer, if the law says something, the law states it, so unless the board wants me to ask
But if
the
we
question,
attach an exhibit,
But
if
this
we
is-
attach
Right.
to Maggie's point,
Well,
if
let
the
me just stop with that.
legislation-
I apologize. I didn't mean to, I'm trying to understand something that was said.
Yeah, so I'm gonna
Okay.
just ask it.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
if
right.
everything has to be built in accordance with the legislation, right?
Right.
But if, to Sabrina's point, we were able to attach exhibit A of what, for avoidance of doubt, this is what we think this says, and there's a picture, that can be incorporated by reference into the legislation, correct?
Yes, as an example of the legislation. Now, could they come in with a different design, then it would be your choice as a special permit saying, no, that doesn't meet this design standard and we feel it's not in keeping with the law based upon what we had been provided when the law was passed.
And we could just say no.
Well, you would have to keep with the special permit standards, but
Right.
you have a lot of discretion under those standards to make the determination that you believe is appropriate.
Well, what if the building comports to the law exactly, to the letter of the law, but is a different design? And we did
Depends, I
attach,
would think it
and we
would
did
depend on
attach
the
the
level of
design.
design. I would think would depend on the
So-
level of difference and whether you believe it's a substantial difference.
Well,
from
what
So
I'm
we have
asking
complete
you-
control
Right.
over that.
let me
You-
finish my question, If we get a design that is exactly consistent with the legislation, but it's a different design than what we attach, but it comports exactly with the letter of the law.
Right.
Do we have the discretion to deny it?
You have a certain amount of discretion to
What
deny
does that mean? What does it mean?
with those designs, just as any site plan, as any special permit, you have a certain amount of discretion on design standards. So
And
that's
if
Well,
we
what does
attach an
that mean?
exhibit of what we think it means, that gives us even more
I
discretion
think it would give
because-
I think it would give more guidance to any developer that is developing that site as to what's appropriate or not. They can't there is a certain level of design standard that has to be met, that you have discretion with any special permit or site plan.
And we could button that up significantly if we attach it as an exhibit, correct?
That's, I believe that's, based on what the planning director had recommended, that would give a further discretion for you based on that standard.
That doesn't sound like getting
It's not,
down.
I can't give you 100% answer that they
Right.
couldn't do it and that it would be 100% legally inappropriate. I can't
What
give
I'm
you a
getting
100%
at is
answer.
what would be the level of arbitrariness in town action
Right.
if we were to deny something that comports pretty explicitly with the legislation?
It depends how it depends on what your basis is for denying it then, what the basis is for, why you're saying it doesn't meet that level of design
the basis would
standard.
be that it's not consistent with the picture that we attached,
With the architecture,
but it's
right.
consistent with the legislation. So that
But it
would
would
be,
be in the legislation, the
Excuse me?
picture would be part of the
I
legislation.
don't think it's the same
Excuse
thing as
me.
what.
No, I'm just making sure you understand it, cause you don't seem to be understanding it.
you're not understanding the question.
I
You're
do
not
understand the
understanding the
question.
question.
I think he
Do understand
The
the question.
the question
She
is.
gave you an answer to the
Please,
question
please.
which she
Hold on,
understood.
Please don't.
No.
Please don't.
The question is, if we get a design that doesn't match the attached picture.
Right.
But it is consistent with the legislation. Could we deny it?
I would think
Simply because it is not the picture that we attached.
I don't think simply because it's not the picture. I think there has to be a materiality to it. I can't
So
say 100% just because it
that's what I'm
doesn't
getting
miss
at,
it.
and
Right.
that's what people have not, that's what you
that's-
didn't
right.
understand,
But
Lisa.
we had-
No, I understood.
They
we
can-
had said, I think,
you know,
I
we-
believe, look, I hadn't been, and I don't mean to interrupt,
No, it's
pardon me.
okay, I just
My-
wanna be really precise about this.
Right, I can't say 100% if it doesn't exactly match that picture, that you're gonna have the authority to deny it solely based on that one fact,
So it's not gonna match the picture exactly, it can't, because the picture doesn't show where exactly is the air
That's not the
conditioning unit.
point.
Let
It's
me
a
finish
general,
speaking though.
it's a general
So
architectural
I'm gonna finish
design,
speaking.
right?
So it's never going to be exactly the same, but it will be substantially the same, and if it's not substantially the same, my understanding is we actually can deny it.
So my question, to be even more precise, is if it's a different architectural design, but it matches the letter of the law exactly, could we deny it?
It depends on the materiality. I can't give you a blank yes or no answer. It depends on the materiality of the difference and why you're saying that design is not appropriate for this particular development.
So maybe an example, if you can answer, if you can't understand, if it turned out that it blocks the view shed in a different way, but it still nonetheless follows the letter of the law.
Right.
Which arguably might change our view on secret after the fact, I'm just sort of throwing into perspective. That might be something that will allow us to say, no, hey, this is not, you're blocking the view shed, you're encroaching more in a particular area. You're using, what about totally different materials or?
Right, exactly, that it's totally out of character with what, with what you have proposed for that area, exactly.
So those might be some examples that allow us to reconsider.
Right, and it
Or
would
if
be
it was
based,
one straight wall instead of a
exactly,
crenellated wall.
if it had a greater impact than what was proposed, exactly. I would think you would have the discretion then to take action at that point. But again, it's based on the materiality, there's, like the supervisor had said, there's gonna be some modification to the plans. But you can't, if they came in just with something with 4 brick walls that met the design, that met the standards of the law, and you denied it, I would think that would be upheld, that denial, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about insubstantial modifications. Obviously, we don't know and they don't know exactly what's going to be built. So we're talking about something beyond, insubstantial
Well, that's,
modifications.
again, it would be based on the characteristics of that change. You'd have to, this board does the analysis of it, and it would have to set forth the reasons why those changes from what was previously presented have substantial impacts or create a special permit development that you cannot approve.
And we still have ultimate site plan approval.
Right.
And if it makes you feel better, it does give me some comfort. I think that they've spent a lot of money on architects and looking at different revisions based on comments from the public. So I feel pretty comfortable, and they even said it, and we have Don Feinberg, who's the owner of the property, is I see online now. I feel pretty comfortable that they want to build exactly what they proposed. And they intend to build exactly what they proposed. Don, can you comment on that?
Yes, I can. In fact, obviously, you're gonna have some discussions about materials used and textures and door handles and window pane or window frames. There's gonna be that kind of specification and greater detail, but we're not looking to all of a sudden, the basic plan you have in front is the basic plan that we are going to want to build. And so really what I see as being remaining is just detailing it out. Everybody does need, it's like anybody who was going to the house in Chapel, you have your plan, and then you have sort of your exterior design, what the paint is, what the color is, those kinds of things.
Okay,
Does that answer the question?
does for me.
Well,
If I can make one fast comment while I'm on here, I just think, Vicky, if I can speak to you directly, I think the issue that you're raising is a little bit of a theoretical one. In fact, the picture, if the picture diverges from your language, it shouldn't be in there. And my understanding is the picture conforms to your language. And so there really shouldn't be much daylight between and the possibility of there being something where you could somehow adhere directly to your language, but then have a totally different picture. That I think that could not happen.
That's what I was trying to ascertain, and it was not so much a theoretical question as much as a question of what could happen.
And
The language.
Then I'm just finished, sorry, then I just want to reiterate that, this is the building we're seeking to build, in the main, completely in the main.
Thank you.
The language of the law does not include many of the architectural features that we see in the images. So I'm confused as to where this image might be attached. Is it something akin to legislative history? Is this, I don't know where it's attached.
It would be I would assume it would be part of the resolution. I don't think it would be actual part of the law
It will be
itself.
part of the
It would be part of the
resolution.
resolution that's adopted as the proposed plan that was presented, so.
But if it really was, my point is, if what we see on the outside really is mandatory, it should be in the law.
It can't, the actual picture design would not be part of the law.
It goes to legislative intent, and which my understanding is would be upheld if it was not built
I
the
would
way
say
the
it might be
legislative
upheld, but
intent.
it might not be upheld if there was a lawsuit. I mean, what if the property's sold and another person comes in and says, it's a hardship for them. They buy it, and they come in, and there's nothing to stop the current owner from selling it, and they say it would be a hardship for them to adhere to that standard. I mean, right now, the law says that all of what design's in there, the town board may waive or modify or whole in part the standards, where it will still serve the public interest and is necessary to avoid an unreasonable hardship upon the argument. I'm just saying, as someone who litigated for a very long time, and I'm still recovering from those many years, there's a lot of issues here that can be explored in litigation. And people just should be aware of the flaws here. People should be aware that this property could be sold. And I think that somebody coming in as a purchaser would have a strong argument that, hey, I'm a purchaser. I had nothing to do with the ideas that were in the picture at the time the law was passed, but my design adheres to the law, checks all the boxes. You don't like it, I'm still entitled to build it. What if they wanted to build another conifer, a taller, longer conifer with some tweaks, the same style, clapboard, the same style roof, everything. A conifer is kind of it doesn't have a flat front. It's already in the community. What would be the justification for keeping it out? Again, these are arguments in litigation, but my point is, it's not guaranteed that what we see is what we're going to get, and people should be aware of this. And the town board should take this into consideration. It's been told to you repeatedly by Mr. Jekyll, who's sitting here. I'm saying, I just quoted from his statement at 3 different meetings. It's a valid issue.
So Maggie,
And he's on our zoning.
my view is
He's on the architectural
on the
board, so
architectural
people
board.
can know
Yes,
who you're
yes.
referring to.
I don't think that you can ever have certainty in this life, right? And even if we signed off on the exact building and there was site plan and we said, this is the exact building that's gonna be built, we're all good, everyone loves it, this is what's gonna happen. You can never guarantee that a property is not gonna be sold, right? And I'm sure Bob's seen it, I know our planning department has seen it, where somebody has even a residential house. I'm building a brand new house, I'm done, it complies with zoning, I've been through the ARB, I've been through the planning board, and then all of a sudden I have to sell my property. Someone could come in and wanna do something completely different, and you know what? They have to go back to the planning board and the architectural review board and everything else. You can't ever have certainty in this life. You just can't. And we're hearing from the developer that this is what they want to build. We have significant environmental standards. We have this is not an easy threshold for somebody to come in and say, I'm gonna build another building. They have to comply with a lot of significant and very expensive environmental thresholds as well as architectural thresholds to meet this. So no one can come in and just say, I'm gonna just build a square building. It wouldn't be possible.
I'm not talking about a square building.
But we have to just do the best we can. And unfortunately, you can never legislate or guarantee that there's not gonna be change.
Well, I'm telling you that a lot of people think you are voting on approval for that exact building. And when they hear that that is not true, they are very confused what's going on here. They think it's like a building permit's gonna issue and you're voting on the building permit and that building's gonna be approved and that's what your vote is. A lot of people do not
Maybe you
understand.
should tell those people to come to the town board and ask us those questions
Okay.
instead of hearing it secondhand, because we haven't seen those people and we can answer those questions, and anyone who has watched any of our many meetings and work sessions and meetings with the architectural review board and the planning board could answer those questions
Well,
for themselves.
I watched all of them and I still think that that's a possibility, so, and I'm paying attention.
Again, you can't legislate or ever guarantee perfection in this world, you just
Right.
can't.
So I have a question for our attorney. Could we pass the legislation at the same time that we do the site planning?
You can, but that's not the process that's been proposed here.
But couldn't we do that? And that would alleviate a lot of these concerns.
You could, but the applicant has proposed the legislation, you're doing the secret review of the legislation, so.
Well, it even
and
goes
the
beyond
project-
that.
And the secret review and the underlying project, but the architecture is,
We made the decision at the very beginning of this process, this board did, including you, that's not how we were gonna progress. So to now rewrite history is, I think, really unfair to
Well, I
everyone.
mean, what would be the disadvantage to doing that if it could alleviate a lot of these concerns?
Because I don't think I think, well, it's up to the board members, but whether there is a substantial concern about that is part of the issue, and
What
there are
would be the
controls.
downside is what I'm asking.
You've gone through a huge process here, and there's a question before you. I would think the applicant has significant concerns
Wait a minute,
about
but we
that.
haven't wasted our time, we would have had to go through this process. A public hearing and everything we've done so far, we would have to go through.
That's your decision.
And then
it's up
they
to
have to go through the site planning. So all I'm saying is, what if we do the final approval of the legislation with the site planning?
So
What would be the downside to that?
Can I just answer,
Go
cause
ahead.
my
Well,
understanding.
this is my question for
I
council.
know, but he's
I
just
don't
not
think-
gonna be aware of this fact that I'm going to let him know. That my understanding is that the applicant is almost completed with site plan review. The only thing left is a very expensive engineering plan that they frankly don't wanna pay for if this is not gonna get approved. And that is all that's left. I think and Sabrina, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Nanette, I think they're willing to submit everything they've done, and I believe they have. All that's left is one piece that frankly, I don't blame them, they don't wanna spend another $50,000 when they don't know if this is gonna get approved. And we made the decision a long time ago, months and months ago, that this is how we were proceeding with this application, and to turn around now, I think is completely unfair.
I have one other statement is if, even if you do that process and you made them get the site plan approval for this particular building, if they went ahead and sold it to somebody else, that person could throw that out the window and come back and do it
Okay.
again, so
Got it. Okay.
where that's the other reason why that doesn't really
That's
give
helpful,
you a
thank
nuts
you.
and bolts, way of handling that issue, so.
Which is what I was
That's what I-
talking
that's
about,
what I
that
wanted.
nothing can be
Well,
perfect and
Having
it
spent
can always
many years
happen.
considering, making my living in litigation, I'm not convinced. And this building, the community still may not get what it sees. On traffic, one of the points made was that there was no study on the roads proximate to 50 North Greeley, and that includes the further part of North Greeley, Bischoff, and Maple, and also Castle Road. You heard, and nothing was said about that. You heard a resident at the August 8th meeting who lives on Maple Avenue who came and said she already feels traffic's at an unsafe level and expressed concerns about the 50 North Greeley development making it worse. Now, this is the very law says that roadways giving vehicular access to 50 North Greeley shall be adequate to accommodate the anticipated traffic generation resulting from the development proposed thereon. But there's been no studies to show that Maple, Bischoff, Castle Road can do that. The town board shall not approve a special use permit until and unless said board determines that the roads and intersections proximate to the project site are capable of accommodating the additional traffic generation, or if not, that the necessary improvements will be made prior to the occupancy of the development. Now, I just don't know how that happens. I mean,
Well, I think you just hit it on the head that we will not approve a site plan approval until that's done.
no, but this
That's
should be
the
in
next-
seeker.
That's the next
What I'm saying
step.
is seeker says you cannot kick reasonably anticipated impacts down the road. The impact that needs to be studied is right here. It hasn't been studied. And it raises the question of who's gonna pay for it, what can be done, but it's not studied at all in your current draft of the negative declaration. And you've already heard from somebody who took the time out to come here, who lives there, and expressed the reality, not just the theoretical, the reality of concerns. So I'm pointing that out on traffic. As I said, we have a parking report coming in, and we just couldn't, we're just a grassroots group. And we had to react to a document released on September 1, the Friday before Labor Day weekend, and we got in as many comments as we could, so before you sat down at that work session, you would have it. But more is coming, and we're doing the best we can. We do not have the resources, staff, or money that the town board has, so we're doing the best we can, but more is coming in. Finally, I would like to reiterate that these are concerns from residents. These are not just me saying it. Yes, I'm packaging it and I'm delivering it, but it's not just me. And there's plenty of concerns out there about this development, which takes me to the point that I was originally going to start out with, which was at the same work session last week, It started off with a discussion about the future of the commuter lot, which is 23 acres of land owned by Newcastle taxpayers. And there are many mentions of community outreach and community engagement being essential to a successful result. But as I listened to that, I thought, here we go again. I have heard talk about community engagement for the form-based code and for this, and when rubber meets the road, somehow the community voice is not given effect. And what do I mean by that? In this case, yes, you've had a number of hearing nights where people can stand up here and make comments, and you have a number of, and you're taking written comments. But a big portion of the community has said, this building is too big, scale it back. And yet, it hasn't been scaled back at all. It's the same height and basically the same length that it always was. The density's increased from its prior height of 45 apartments to 50. But the parking, the scale and the mass is the same. This is not a contest, an election, a beauty contest where one vote makes a difference. This is supposed to be consensus building. And if 40% of the community says it's too massive and it should be scaled back, that's significant. It may be 60% saying it. I don't know how you can tell. But the number one point people raise is it's too big, scale it back. And yet it hasn't happened. And that is contrary to things that go on around here all the time. In Yorktown, a recent project of the former Soundview school site had to be scaled back before it got approval. In Armonk, a project at the former Mariani Garden site went through 3 or 4 revisions before it got approval. And it happened here in 2012 with Conifer, which was required by the then town board to reduce by an entire floor and go from 36 apartments to 28. And that's for an entirely legally defined affordable housing building, not one that will be mostly market rate luxury apartments as we have with 50 North Greeley. So despite what the town has done in the past, and despite a good segment of the community, and I really think it's a significant one, saying scale it back, the law you're considering enacting remains unchanged in scale and density. Now, the developer claims it can't make the appropriate return on investment unless it stays as big and as dense as it has been from when first proposed. Well, if that's all the developer has to say, then why have zoning at all? Honestly, developers say things like that all the time. Again, even with Conifer, as I recall, the developer claimed it had to remain at the peak of 36 apartments to be profitable, and yet it ended up being reduced by about 22% to 28 apartments. The lot on Route 17 near Old Stone Pizzeria is about the same size as 50 North Greeley, and it was profitable enough for a local developer to buy the land and build 14 apartments with retail on the ground floor and proper parking. Here with 50 North Greeley, even though there evidently aren't land purchase costs because the property, I believe, was inherited, they are insisting on adding more than 15 feet in height above current zoning, 2 stories, and more than tripling the number of apartments compared to what was built up at Route 117. Now, the town board not insisting on scaling back is coming across to many in the community as catering to developers and their interests. And you may not see it that way from where you sit, but many residents have noted just that. To go back to the upcoming work on the 23 acres in the commuter lot, what you town board members must decide, what you decide to do with the legislation about 50 North Greeley will either build your credibility in the community or it will not, in terms of your desire to build a community consensus, which again is not who wins in the count. It's, is there enough in the community to get broad-ranging support for a particular project? This should be a consensus building effort. So should the 23 acres. But so far what's happening here is not, because the project has not been scaled back. And there's still time to do this. The choice is yours, but it's going to impact what happens with the development of a very significant project, which is taxpayer-owned land, 23 acres of taxpayer-owned land. You want people to buy into the process. You want them to believe that they're really being heard. I urge you to do something now that takes into account the significant portion of the community that believes that project is way too big. Thank you.
Okay, Millie.
So before any further debate, we want to make our
Can you just give us your last name?
Schwartz, SCHWARTZ.
Perfect.
Before any further debate, we want to make our stance explicitly clear. The two main sides to the argument on 50 North Greeley have been to either shut down the construction or to let the building proceed unhindered. Neither one of these is productive. Instead, the town should mandate that the 50 North Greeley building is majority affordable units and then allow its construction. We clarify this because one of Safe Chappaqua main arguments against us is that building is just more luxury housing. This argument is now completely meaningless and baseless because we have acknowledged it is true and emphasized that our position is to change it from luxury to affordable as a condition of construction. In fact, one of our main concerns here tonight is that the developer, who 2 meetings ago pledged to raise the rate of affordable units in the development from 12% to 20%, has not actually done so in the construction plans. So we call upon the developer to follow their promise and stick to their words. The town has its eyes on you. Be honest. Town board. We also wanted to remind you that you have the power to hold the developer accountable. You are the ones granting them this zoning exception. You hold the cards, so please make the development affordable, or at least make sure that this landlord who made a promise to those citizens that you represent follows through and raises the affordable unit rate from 12% to 20%. And I am talking to you, Jeremy Saland, Victoria Tip, Lisa Katz, Ali Chuntab, and Holly A.F. McCall. We don't care about how the building looks or the size. We just want it to be affordable. With that, we get into our argument for affordable housing.
Thank you.
Millie, as was said last time, it's not gonna be 100% affordable building. That's not the building they want.
50%.
That's not the building that they wanna build, and we can't force them to do that. However, they did guarantee that it would be 20% affordable and workforce housing, which is twice the requirement in town right now, twice the legislative requirement, and we will 100% hold them to that. That's part of the reasons
That's all
that
we
we've been negotiating with them. Okay, Clarissa. And just, can you give me your last name also?
Covey, C-O-V-E-Y.
Thank you.
I've lived in not affordable, but more accessible housing before. Until I was 7, I lived in an apartment building in Bronxville, which, like Chappaqua, is a small town in Westchester with a wonderful school system. My parents moved there a year after they married and were looking for a place to raise small children until they had enough money to move to a larger house. I liked my apartment building. My music teacher lived on my same floor, so getting to lessons was easy. I liked the safety apartment buildings gave me, and I liked that it was easier to find my parents if I needed them. I couldn't see it then, but looking back, I liked that my parents could enroll their children in a top-rated school, even if they were just starting out. I moved away 10 years ago, but still enjoy going back and seeing my friends from the school. The apartment building is bound to be a place where a family chooses to settle and a child forms their first memories. And I'd hate to see a kid from similar upbringings be denied the same chance to have these beginnings in Chappaqua. I have also read that the building caters to empty nesters and young professionals. Instead of moving out of a place they've already settled into, Chappaqua parents with grown children can choose another place to live that better suits their needs, rather than a large, empty house. People looking to start a business in Chappaqua can find a cost-friendly home close to their work while gaining a foothold there. The diversity in family types adds to the vibrancy while addressing the infamous homogeneity of the town. I've heard about the issue of the building's aesthetics. Some say that the proposed affordable housing unit will interfere with Chappaqa's signature look. However, the proposed building is set to resemble the apartments next to the train tracks. At least to me, the already standing building fits in with the scenery around it. It is nestled behind trees, which keeps the naturey feel that many residents have moved here for. And even if you find the apartments next to the train station contrast with its surroundings and hurt the visual atmosphere of the town, we can design the proposed building to look more like the other houses here, as my old apartment's pre-war brick facade blended in with the town's historic English-style ambiance. We can introduce some alterations to the proposed building that solves the aesthetic problem. We can put effort into making Chappaqua more accessible and lively, stimulating business by populating the downtown area and encouraging young professionals to start jobs here, and letting young children from a new family live in a safe place, attend our prestigious school district, and remember Chappaqua as the place that gave their family a chance, as I remember my childhood town did for mine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne Chazen.
Actually, what the young lady said
Hi everyone. Actually, what the young lady said is correct, that one of the things, I read the negative declaration. I am not an attorney, I am not a planning person. I found that a very complicated document. But on top of which, I found that many of the things it was saying are not actually in the law, and some of the things it isn't saying are some of the concerns we have tonight. So for instance, as they were saying, the owner is saying 20% housing, but the law still says 12%. So we have this problem where, as I understand it, we're getting promises in one place that are not necessarily following through in the law. So I do agree with them that there is a disconnect, just the same as there is a disconnect between what we are being promised. For instance, I have never heard, and in this document I heard blue-green roof as a possibility, but I was told and showed everything that shows that it's an absolute green roof forever. But I see nothing to say that this building is going to have a green roof in perpetuity or a green roof at all. Second floor balconies with courtyards. I have nothing in this document. I also have nothing in this document that says there are contaminants in the soil. This, I don't know her name, but this is the first I heard that anything about it was addressed, yet we're shown a negative declaration saying everything is fine. But until Rush came along with independent evidence showing that it's not, and by the way, Hunts Lane is only 300 feet, one football field away from this, and it may be the other side of a train track. But the fact of the matter is, years ago in Pound Ridge, the water from a dry cleaner took out a whole area, like 5 miles in diameter in terms of poison in the water. So water underground tables goes everywhere. So if something is 300 feet away, that to assume that there isn't going to be a problem, now you say, well, this can be taken care of in the site plan, which is possibly true. But let's take this scenario. This owner has put, as he really says, a lot of money into this project on the assumption that he's going to build this project. He gets in there on the site plan and decides he's got another conifer with the brown fill, and maybe not a perfect brown fill, but problems. He also doesn't have the state behind him, because it's not 100% affordable, to do all the work for him. He's got to finance that himself. Maybe he decides this isn't worth it, we're not worth it, and sells. I think that this board, I really appreciate, you guys are smart, Jeremy and Vicky and Lisa and Allie and Holly, you guys are smart. And I think I think, except for you, Lisa, I think everyone is skeptical and asking the right questions. I feel a little sometimes when I'm talking to you like I'm talking to the developer's proxy.
No, I've just asked the questions already.
You often answer for the developer when another one of your board members makes a point. But my question is, maybe you shouldn't be answering. Maybe this is not your place. Your place is to be skeptical, as to be a proxy for our town and our people, like your town board members are for the most part, and I am impressed at how they are. And I feel sometimes, and it's hard for me to get up here, because as much as I like you as a person, I feel like I'm often talking to a representative of the developer rather than someone I voted for and worked for office. So I'm disappointed by that. I'm very disappointed.
Can I just address that, because
Sure.
that is 100% not true. And I have been working diligently with the planning board, with the architecture review board, with the developer, with our town planner and everyone else to answer these questions way more than my fellow board members who are asking the right questions. But I spend countless hours trying to make sure that we have everything buttoned up. And just because I'm gonna finish speaking. Just because, by buttoned up, I mean that we're asking the right questions. And just because you might not agree with the answers doesn't mean that I haven't considered every single question.
If you considered every single question, how come this negative declaration never said a word about contaminants? How come it talks blue-green roof but never tells me if I'm actually even gonna get a green roof at all? If I have any hope of ever getting a green roof? If it tells me, well, we don't need the traffic is fine, when I find out that there's no traffic impact study that was done, but it was done for Conifer, which has fewer units, it was done for 149 King Street, which has fewer units. So I'm looking at things and I'm feeling that this project has special privileges, that this project is getting a pass that I've never seen happen before. And I'm not feeling that from anybody else. I'm feeling a level of skepticism, of good questions. And I have to say, I'm not feeling that. I'm feeling that when a question is answered, you jump in right away. Let the developer answer these.
Because I'm not playing politics, I'm trying to do what's right for the town.
But I'd rather
And
hear
I
them
understand
answer.
that you don't like that. but that's what I'm trying
I'd
to
rather
do.
hear them answer, it's their job to answer
It
their
is.
project.
That's why we asked
it's
them those
your
questions to
job.
address your
It's
letter
your job to
that
be
you
to be the
sent.
proxy for the residents and to make sure that we're comfortable. When I read the negative declaration, it said nothing. And all this stuff that Rush brought up forward at their own expense with their own experts was not in the negative declaration. Based on the negative declaration, I also would have said, yeah, there's no problem at all. Based on now what I said, I'm like, how could anybody say that this is a negative declaration? And I realize what you're saying is, well, we can't know the level of contaminants till we go in there. But I do want to point out that when we bought our house, there was asbestos in the basement. And we were told if we wrapped it and left it, we'd probably be okay. The moment we disturbed it, we had major contamination. So I will tell you, just like with 54 Hunts Place, that they may not have had a significant issue. They probably had some, but they didn't have as much until they disturbed the site. So there is a disturbance. There also is the fact that this is much closer to residences. So if you do disturb it and you have a problem and the developer decides he's going to sell to someone else, you have a problem right on top of residences. I don't live there. This is not NIMBY. I live quite far from town. This is a love of my town and a desire not to poison our watershed, which is a real possibility. We are part of the watershed, the Sawmill River watershed. It's the desire to have a project that is a true collaboration. We have had you mentioned in here robust engagement in this thing. I have not seen that robust engagement. I have seen frustrated people on the planning board, frustrated people in the architectural review board saying, we're not getting our parts thought. I have not heard the robust engagement. Robust engagement would mean that there's some level, and I understand give and take. I understand everything I want can't happen, everything they want can't happen, everything you want can't happen, or the developer. But the fact is, right now we have everything the developer wants and nothing that anybody else has asked for. Nothing. And the funny thing is, you guys have the power and you're all so smart and you could sit back and have a little patience and say, you know what, let's wait a little bit. Let's get something that's closer to what the community wants. And this isn't it. Also, right in here, you mentioned that historically that property has always had parking for its retail. But then you go on to say, but we won't. We'll just use it in town because we've done these studies. By the way, those studies were in March and November, not December when people do holiday shopping, not the nice warm weather when people are out and about, or September and October when kids are back in school right away. It's cherry picked. There's a lot of things that I feel are glossed over, and I just feel you guys are better than this. You're better than this. Don't let someone push you around. You have the power, and there's nobody is saying we don't want a property there. And I want to stress that. I have not heard anyone get up here and say I don't want anything there. Everybody wants. That's an eyesore. And by the way, that's another problem I have. If this developer really wanted to work with this town, he'd keep that property nice in respect to the town until he does something. Instead, it looks like a dump. It makes me feel he doesn't respect us already. And if he doesn't respect us now, when he digs in and he discovers there's tanks and he decides it's too expensive and he decides to sell and somebody comes in who doesn't have the same things, we're going to get in a situation with a suit. Somebody's saying, well, it's met the letter of the law and I'm going to sue you if you don't do it because it has met the letter of the law. So I feel this negative declaration just is very lightweight for what is out there. And I had a million other things, but I don't want to take up everybody's time. But long and short, I think you could do better. I beg you to do better. I believe in you. Please try to do more. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. Sabrina, could you talk to the SECRA process, and do you think it's sufficiently done? I know we went over at the work session the other day. In detail.
Yeah, I do. I think that the negative declaration that I reviewed with you is in draft form right now. All of the categories were looked at. As we discussed at the meeting, in regards to the Part 1 environmental assessment, the applicant is preparing information to kind of summarize what they had done to the property, and will include that in the environmental, in the negative declaration. In regards to all the other categories, there really weren't any missing, there wasn't any missing information as we discussed the other night on September 5th. If the town board feels there's an area that needs to be expanded upon, I can do that.
Do you feel there's areas that needed to be expanded upon?
I do not. For example, when we talk about stormwater and flooding, there's a requirement that the applicant demonstrate qualitatively and quantitatively that the new development will not create any downstream flooding within the town's stormwater system or on roadways or other private properties. That is something that needs to be demonstrated. So in every category where we haven't where we have a tie-in, if you will, to further investigation, it is outlined in this negative declaration.
Okay.
Sabrina, I want to clarify another thing as well, so that the record is accurate. We've heard comments about contamination 300 feet away. What, if anything, have you learned or found based on your own review, based on from the applicant, based on whatever you've done, that indicates there is in fact contamination at that site that would...
There is no contamination on this site.
And if you learn that there is...
That we know of today.
Right, so if you
It is similar to any other project that is reviewed by the planning board, the town board, the zoning board, or through a building permit.
So if it learned...
They submit documentation that we review. We have examined all of the state records regarding, leaking or contaminated sites, very much like the brownfield site at 54 Hunts Place. It was listed all over the place. We have looked at all the records that the applicant has cited to confirm there is no contamination on this site or suspected contamination on this site.
Thank you.
Just one thing to add, if there is contamination found during construction, the concern about the developer then walking away is not feasible, because once the contamination is located, the owner of the property is gonna be responsible for cleaning up that contamination. And they're not gonna, and in all likelihood, they're not gonna be able to sell the property with contamination on it. So that, I don't think that's a real legitimate concern for the board to have with respect to that issue, so.
Thank you, that addresses a question I had. Could I ask Sabrina a question?
Sure, of course.
Sabrina, there was some talk about the streets nearby, like Castle, Maple, Bischoff. My understanding is those were not studied. We studied mostly the impacts to the town, in the town intersections. Is that accurate? And if so, are there ways to manage potential or found increased traffic on some of those side streets? Because I don't feel like I don't see the same concern on King and North and South Greeley. They're kind of the main roads, but Maple, Castle, I mean, these are more side streets. What types of mitigations or ways to address it do we have?
So the traffic analysis that was done, while it was not a traffic impact study, it was an analysis. It really looked at the directionals of, there were diagrams and analysis as to origin and destination analysis of where cars would go, if you will. There was no discussion of cars causing congestion or traffic on side streets. We do not currently know whether or not there's any traffic congestion on those side streets. The level of service analysis relates to major intersections. So we looked at the information, our traffic consultant looked at the information that the applicant submitted. Our consultant asked them to do a little bit more analysis. They did, and they identified that there was no significant impact from traffic.
And I assume that just like we have options for some of the side streets that we get concerns about that aren't having any construction, like when we had the detour, we have other ways as a town to address those types of issues when they come up.
I'm not certain as to what type of issues. Are you talking about parking on the sides of the streets? Are you talking about speeding?
I guess I'm just saying that while we don't expect there to be a major impact, we do still have tools that we can address if we find out, 6 months after the project is open, that there's an unforeseen impact on a small street.
The town board always has the ability to make changes to the roadway infrastructure. It's on the local roads, on our roads.
Okay.
And those are all our roads, correct?
Yes, everything except South Greeley.
I certainly don't want those streets to be negatively impacted, but it doesn't sound like we have any reason other than an anecdote to believe that at this time. So I certainly hope that those homeowners don't have a negative experience if this gets built.
So I have a similar question, Sabrina, for you regarding emergency access. That point was brought up a lot, and I'm wondering if maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on how we landed on the declaration in terms of access for emergency vehicles.
I guess when you say landed on access for emergency vehicles, the applicant has committed to putting, to raising the height of the garage to fit an ambulance, much like Conifer did. Again, the devil's in the details of the site plan and the actual construction drawings to determine how tall that garage is. As far as access, the question will come to play during site plan review regarding parking on that street. Whether or not spaces are going to be left in front of the building for emergency vehicles to pull in.
What about access for fire truck, ambulance, heading towards the building, coming past the post office? I'm talking about how do we address the concern of the width of the street and making sure that emergency service vehicles are
You would take away parking. The town board would take away parking to address that. The road is what the road is.
Sabrina, is that going to impact the parking study?
The applicant is not counting the spaces in front of the building as part of their parking count.
And how many spots would we anticipate removing from North Greeley in order to fit?
I do not have a recommendation for you. I have not been asked to look at that in relation to this project. It has just been conjecture on behalf of certain board members and discussion at this point.
Sabrina,
Until we get a site plan, it will be very difficult to give the fire department something to look at to understand where the points of egress are, to understand whether or not the electrical lines, the electrical wires are going to be put underground. More investigation needs to occur.
But Sabrina, so just to add on to that, we could demand though, if it was an issue, that the wires be put underground or.
You already have in the draft legislation that the power lines must be put underground. There is a provision, for the applicant to come back to you if there's technical difficulty or some other unforeseen circumstance that will prevent that. And so putting those wires underground helps tremendously when it comes to emergency fire access.
Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, and then in terms of the width of the street, I mean, that's the same as it is now.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
if fire has, I'm just trying to understand, so if fire truck has trouble getting down the street now, that's not necessarily a change. And then my understanding is that we're gonna deal with fire and all of that as part of site plan approval. So if we needed to change, if we felt in working with the fire department that the entrance needed to be moved, things like that, we would demand that as well for safety concerns, correct?
You could, absolutely, during the site plan.
Okay. Does that answer everyone's questions? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry for the diversion.
No,
I think we
that's
still
what we're
had
here
people
for.
comment.
Cassiopeia? Can you just let me know your last name also?
Sant.
S-A-N-T?
S-A-N-D-T. Yeah. Okay. Chappaqua is a town that is unbelievably inaccessible. It is among the least affordable towns in New York, one of the least diverse in the Lower Hudson Valley, and overall intolerant and closed off to really anyone but the elite. And this is no accident. Quick history lesson. Here in Chappaqua, laws were written during the segregation era that heavily restricted multi-family, multi-story housing, the type of homes that lower income people would have more access to. Since marginalized Americans were and still are economically disadvantaged by systemic racism, the result was and is a town where low-income Americans, particularly minorities, could not and still cannot move in. These laws remain in our town's legislature to this day, continuing to shape our housing policy. For example, 40% of Westchester is Black or Latino. Less than 6% of Chappaqua is Black or Latino. This is not a coincidence. It's obvious that our town's housing laws are rooted in hatred, and we need reform. I'd also like to add that if you come up here tonight and talk about how 15 North Greeley is bad because it doesn't fit with our zoning laws, if that is your argument against it, then your argument is based on laws that were explicitly designed for racial segregation. We also believe that every single American, regardless of their economic background, deserves a quality education. As I'm sure we all know, Chappaqua has one of the best school districts in the country. Other nearby districts, for example, say Ossining, where almost half of all students come from low-income families, they don't get to have that luxury. We as a town need to embrace the idea of educational justice, the idea that no child should receive a lower standard of schooling because of economic factors outside of their control. And that entails creating affordable housing to allow people to move in and access our school district. Look, we know that 50 North Greeley is not an affordable development right now. This is why we are stressing that the town should change it, edit the terms of the construction agreement, do whatever it can to mandate that the developer creates an affordable building. And we have to do this because we cannot, in our good conscience, continue to exclude people from our town using segregation-era laws or to deny children a good education because we are too afraid to make a change. We need to get off our asses and do the right thing. Say no to discrimination, say no to inequality, and say yes to affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Kent Thomas.
Good evening. So I'm here on my own, but a lot of what I'm saying will parallel the letter of June 13th that the SAB sent to the town board. Okay, so, but first thing I want to start out with is the life cycle of a building, okay? And there's two portions to it from a carbon perspective, and one is embodied carbon, which I'll get to in a second, and the second is operating carbon. So there's been a little confusion about embodied carbon, especially with an article that was in a newspaper or online paper recently. The embodied carbon from a building incorporates all of the materials that are put into it, all of the carbon that's emitted by creating those materials, the transportation of those materials, etc. So this building, to its credit, is going to be using this mass timber construction. However, the mass timber construction is only a small portion of the embodied carbon in the building, okay? So it's reported that by having the mass timber construction, that would mitigate all of the carbon of the building. That's not really true. But I would say that the other part of it is that mass timber construction, if you're thinking about a mass timber, it's not like something where you're gonna go to Bear Mountain Inn and you're gonna see a big, tree trunk that they're using to support it. It's an engineered product. Okay, it's milled, it's laminated, there are many things that are done to it, so it's not in its natural state. Okay, just want to try and be clear on that. So the other part of the embodied carbon is concrete, steel, all of those kinds of things. Those have not been addressed at all, in this potential legislation. Also, the demolishing of the old building and what's going to happen there hasn't really been discussed to my knowledge. There are supports that are going to be needed to put into the ground so the building doesn't sink. There are also going to be supports that have to be removed. All of that is going to take machinery. So there's going to be carbon emitted by everything that's done there. Okay, so as far as the amount, and I cannot give you numbers, but as far as the amount of carbon that's going to be mitigated by using the mass timber construction, it's not a huge percentage. In one of the documents it was stated that they were reduced by 69%, but I believe that's probably over steel that would be used in its place. Okay, so if we move forward to
So Ken, just to touch on that for a second.
Sure.
Are there, as the chair of the SAB, are there vehicles that you're aware of now in the construction industry that would allow them to get rid of all carbon and not use any steel, and other than, I guess, doing a lot?
To my knowledge, no. There is low carbon steel and there is low carbon concrete. So those are potentials. I don't know about cost and also accessibility. I don't know where there are plants located that would be producing that, so that there's, because there's always an offset between transportation and, this stuff's all very heavy. So there's between transportation and the amount of carbon that you're going to be,
And the same
saving.
thing for demolishing the building. Do you know of any way to do that where you're not using carbon at all?
No. But it would be a matter of what happens to the rubble after it's demolished, and whether it's separated and or whether it's just taken all as one and thrown in a dumpster, quote unquote dumpster, huge, whatever it would be. So that's the issue there, is how to reuse whatever might be there that could be reused. Okay. So moving on to operating. Okay, so so in the original legislation, I'm very glad to see that it's been changed. The original legislation didn't really address the electricity usage on an operating basis. They were relying on the CLCPA, which is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which the state has, which is supposed to decarbonize the electric grid. And originally they were relying on that to do that by 2040, which they've now incorporated the 2021 IECC Appendix CC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code, which does have requirements as far as using renewable energy and where to obtain that. So there's 7 places where it can be obtained, or 7 types of energy that can be obtained that is considered acceptable. As part of that, though, it does say that that there has to be a contract be entered into that's at least 15 years in duration, okay, for the obtaining this renewable energy. So as an action item, what I would propose is that prior to any permission to occupy the building, that this contract is analyzed and reviewed to make sure that it's actually in place before that happens. And then on an ongoing basis, nobody knows what's going to happen to companies or et cetera on an ongoing basis, so we don't know who's going to be supplying. I mean, so I would see a yearly review, an annual review of it, of the renewable energy, make sure it's being renewable energy that's being supplied, okay, and on an ongoing basis. Okay. So the next part, and it's sort of something that Suzanne touched on, which is that in the legislation, so during all the discussions of this, there's been a lot of stuff bandied about. Okay, there's been water mitigation by having cisterns or by having green roofs or by having other facilities that will mitigate the water. In the legislation, there's nothing that guarantees that that's going to happen. As a matter of fact, it says green infrastructure practices to improve water quality through stormwater management such as rain gardens, green roofs, and cisterns shall be provided to the extent readily achievable. Okay, now that doesn't give me a great sense of confidence in that any of this is going to be done. Okay, so the green roofs, in the letter, the SAB, I'm going to reference it is we had many reasons why it's a good thing. Okay, but the other part of the green roofs is if it is incorporated, there are no standards. I don't believe there's anything in the town code as far as maintenance. Okay, so if this green roof is, I wouldn't imagine, going to live forever, so that it will need to be maintained or replaced at some point in time. And I'm sure that residents don't want a brown roof with all dead organic material on top of it at some point. So if it does have a green roof incorporated into it, I think there should be some kind of maintenance procedures that are incorporated also.
We did talk about, to that point, putting in some type of maintenance bond or making sure to make sure that it continues to be maintained, the roof.
And so as far as the water mitigation, I imagine as you go on, you'll see what they're going to be doing, but there's no numbers. This is just kind of stuff that's been thrown out. The green roof will help a little bit, cisterns, et cetera, but we don't really know what's going to eventually actually be built. Okay. The issue that is of the most concern to me is that there is no requirement for solar. Okay, this will be the third residential development. If we take 91 Bedford, if we take Chappaqua Crossing, with I think it's 91 townhomes there are no solar on either of those, and there's no plans for solar on this. There's no guarantee of solar, certainly. I think that's a big issue. Lisa, you've talked many times about how you're worried about the grid being able to keep up with all of the electrification of everything that we're going to be doing over the next 20, 30 years. And the pipes, quote unquote, of the electric grid being big enough to supply this. Well, what would be better than having the energy generated where it's used, so that you don't have to burden the grid with that, extra. So, and then the other part of it is that when you're looking at green buildings, one of the tenets really is that you try and produce as much energy on site as you can for whatever it is, whether it's wind or solar or geothermal or that kind of thing. So I think that this is very important to incorporate. And I think the town is in a good position right now to do some kind of negotiations to incorporate solar into the building. Now, all of the roof surfaces are not going to be, compatible with solar. They're not going to be efficient enough. But whatever they can do, there's a lot of south-facing slopes, and I think they would be good candidates for solar. And I think that would be important.
I think keeping in mind also that there's a gas moratorium, so they're gonna have to find other ways to power the building, whether it be geothermal. I think they're gonna have to figure that out.
So this also was touted as being, when it first was put out, as a groundbreaking legislation. It was going to be legislation that was going to be wanted to be adopted beyond Newcastle to the county or the state. Even I think it falls short of that. I think unless you come up with these requirements and make it have solar, potentially make it have a green roof, make the water mitigation issues as strong as they can be, that it really is not that type of legislation, and there's room to improve, I believe.
Kent, are you saying that, well, you may not be saying this, but do you think that the net zero label is a bit exaggerated? Is that your conclusion?
So there's different net zero labels. Okay, so net zero carbon, it would qualify. It's not net zero emissions, because net zero emissions would be where all the energy that's consumed is generated on site. But as long as we have those guarantees in place that they're going to enter into the contract, and that the contract is reviewed annually to make sure that they are obtaining renewable energy. And there's 4 sources that are cited in the IECC, Appendix CC, that are permissible. that it would be net zero carbon.
So net zero carbon, you think is fine,
You could
because
see,
that's
yeah,
what we've been saying all along.
I think there's a higher ideal to strive towards, but that yes, this would be could be considered net zero carbon.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, alright, thanks.
Right,
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and Chuck Napoli. Before, as Chuck's walking up here, if there's anyone else who would like to speak, there are cards up here at this table. If you can just put your name on a card, they'll be handed up, and we don't shuffle the cards to decide who we wanna speak, it's just in the order that they are received.
Chuck Knapp, I'm gonna push the reset button if you don't mind. And he stole my thunder. And forgive me, I got a new pen today, so I started writing to see how it felt, and I couldn't stop. And so here's what we got, pen. I'll have it printed out for you someday, but bear with me, please. Yeah, the North Greeley zero special permit, the net zero carbon proposed local law. I have a question about that, and I just wanted to say that in September of 2022, an application was submitted. A special use permit application was submitted. And on November 9th, 2022, a presentation was made and a slide showing mass timber construction, the Acme Timber Lofts by the architects was presented. And again, in November, the same presentation, a slide called Mass Timber Apartment Precedent, Carbon 12, also by the architect. And then in May, again, in May 9th of 2023, a presentation was made here again showing a mass timber apartment precedent, Carbon 12 again. Well, the special use permit application submitted in 2022 has prompted the creation of this net zero carbon legislation. And it was based on mass timber construction, environmentally friendly, a model of carbon neutral construction practices. Well, I just want to jump in and tell you right now, that building that you saw wasn't the building, it was a building that somebody else had somewhere else. Might be the Acme or the whatever, but it was a type 4 construction. It was mass timber, floors, walls, ceilings, hallway partitions. But that's not it's not that type anymore. They changed it to a type 5 construction, which happens to be in terms of New York State Building Code, basically 2x4 construction. A house, you could build your house as type 5 construction. We might have mass timber walls. They have to have a 1 hour rating on a type 5 building. And what I'm getting at is that the type of building that you use has to be rated for safety, and the materials you use have to be commensurate with that safety, and basically it's a 1 hour rating on exterior walls. So to get a 1 hour rating in a mass timber building, you need a 5-inch thick wall with some kind of coating on it, like a non-combustible coating. Any wall within 30 feet of a property line in type 5 construction in our state needs to be a 1 hour rated wall, and the only way to do it with mass timber is big, thick, heavy walls. But the interior walls don't have to be, they could be 2x4s. But here's where the thunder got taken away. For the last 11 months, we have been coding for the 3D forms of the concept plan. The shape, size, coverage, height, shadows, stormwater, traffic, parking, occupancy mix, and all the typical land use zoning parameters we have been familiar with since the Chapter 60 of our zoning code was established for the built environment. going to number 4. The concept plans are an urban density of 60 units per acre, and somebody's gonna get a trophy from Governor Hochul for that. Covering 85% of the land, and earned the moniker Big Footprint, impacting the small village built environment of our Hamlet's North Greeley neighborhood. But not since November 9th of 2022 has any specific, measurable, clear, predictable conversation as to the concept's carbon footprint and carbon neutral promises have been made until now, till just now. We've gone 11 months without talking about air pollution and the environmental quality that this building is purported to present. So, let's get to that building. I gotta go to number 5, if you don't mind. And this is a good one. You're gonna like this one. Somewhere in here. In September of 2023, mass timber shows up here again, mostly constructed and prepared for electrical plumbing needs of off-site construction. There will be minimal disturbance on site. This sounds like the negative deck language. Actually, it is. It's line 22. Anyway, of the secret findings. The structure proposed, it is anticipated that piles will be utilized on the land, as there is no subsurface building going on. No impacts was told, based upon the detail provided in the concept plan and the existing site conditions described above in your negative deck. The proposed action and project will not have a significant adverse impact on land. But there is a tremendous big subsurface, subgrade construction required. And how do I know that? I dug up the records for the construction of the Rite Aid building. And I noticed that in the pictures there was some dotted lines underneath the floor, and and so I went and I dug in with the help of staff and found out that that building is truly on piles, but it also is on grade beams. And let me just tell you what a grade beam is, if you don't mind. It's a piece of concrete about 2 feet wide and about 4 feet high. It's a beam. And it sits on top of a thing called a pile cap, where they dig a big hole and they fill it with concrete, and they go over there and build another, dig a big hole, fill it with concrete, and they put a beam across it about 4 feet high, 2 feet wide, filled with concrete and steel, reinforced concrete. There are 71 pile caps underneath the Rite Aid building. And if we just, and 158 piles driven into the ground under each one of the pile caps. But as the negative deck says, there is water down there. And so what's happening is, and I'm gonna try to make a picture, they're gonna have to dig a hole 7 feet deep with 4 feet of water, or 3 feet, or 2. It has to go 7 feet deep. And we know that water is between 2 and 4 feet according to negative deck. I'm using 3 feet as an average number. They're gonna be digging a hole in about 4 feet of water to pour a concrete pad after they drive all these piles into the ground and cut them off at 7 feet below the first floor of the parking garage. All right, now so So what I'm getting at here, and I hope you get a real clear picture, there's quite a bit of disturbance on this property that is gonna need an awful lot of effort to accomplish a stable platform on top of which to build this building. I figured roughly it's gonna take about 400 or 500 piles, but that's based on the Rite Aid proportion. And the Rite Aid is a one-story building, this is 4 stories. And the amount of concrete that's going into this thing is colossal. There is if I have to tell you some numbers, just to let you know, if I was gonna, I have to dig a trench 7 feet deep, 6 feet wide in order to put my beams in there and be able to cut those piles to put the beams on them. I have to de-water that hole. There's a few million gallons of water that have to come out of a trench that's 4,007 feet long. That's how many beams and cross cuts, and that's how much digging is gonna go on underneath this site. I don't know, I mean, you could ask your building engineer and your town engineer and your building inspector to contact me, and I'll go over the details of what I found easily on record for the Rite Aid building, and we could easily transpose what's possible onto more. However, I mean, I really think that if we look at the amount of, I've got about 5,000 tons of CO2 going in the air. I have embodied carbon in this building, just in the foundation and the slab alone, that no way can a stupid little wood building on top of it come anywhere near a negative 0 environmentally friendly building, which it was supposed to, that's what it was sold as. And I think that's the reset button, is that it's not that anymore. And also, I'm saying it's not gonna be, can't be. So, where was I? 520?
Just to follow up on that, I'm gonna ask the same question I asked before. Do you know of any way to build a building without a foundation?
No. Well, no, I don't know if you noticed, but you know where the Pocket Park was? That used to be a little building that back in our day was the new slant. I don't know if you remember, Jill, the new slant. Well, it used to be our community center for kids, except it was tipping. That's why they call it the new slant. The soil down there, the land down there is a huge challenge.
But if you have ideas about, I would love to hear them, I'm sure the rest of the town would do, about how to build a building with no foundation
What you
or
normally
without
do,
concrete
what you
or
normally
steel,
do,
I'd love to hear.
if you just, and I have a few more things that are really important, but I'll say this, that if what you really wanna do is minimize the impact on the first floor. What you wanna do is build as tiny a platform as possible and as big a building on top of it as possible. That's all you wanna do. I mean, you don't pick an acre to cover. You don't pick an acre of real bad soil to put a 4-floor building on top of. Just doesn't make any sense. It's not gonna pencil out. And forget about penciling out dollar-wise. It is a huge, non-sustainable example of what not to do if you're trying to stop air pollution and carbon emissions. Because to make concrete, it is the second most polluter of all material. Aluminum's the other one first. It takes so much energy to make it, so much emissions go up, tons and tons and tons of emissions is coming out of what has to be put in that ground. And I fear that this whole idea of a environmentally friendly law is working. It's a joke. It can't be called that. We have to call it something else.
So Chuck, if I could just to try to clarify what you're saying, because you've said a lot, but I just want to
Yeah.
you're not in any way, of course, suggesting that the building be built with different with a different foundation.
No, I'm
You're
not-
simply,
I'm
so
not-
your point is simply to say that it's not really net zero.
I'm saying this is
your
not,
ultimate
I'm
point? I
just
just wanna
saying,
be clear on what, you know.
yeah, I'm saying it's a
what you're saying.
non-sustainable practice of construction. And it's, but there's other stuff that you need to do besides take a look at the site a little bit more in the negative deck, because that's gotta really be looked at. Not for the cost, but the impacts in the environment. You have to look at that. And I'll tell you what, the text of SECRA should reveal the effects of the proposed action. Your SECRA analysis should say the effects of what this construction is gonna be. Why? On air pollution. Since the main source of greenhouse gases is the use of energy, fossil fuels, and the most important greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide, the US Supreme Court has declared it to be an air pollutant. And the New York State DEC and your board should have ample authority to recognize air pollution in your secret documents. Forget about, all the other stuff of traffic and parking. This is a climate code that we're working on, not our old building code. So you gotta start thinking a little bit more about the climate. Now, I'm near the end, all right? And then because this is really important. I tried talking so many times, or I tried to tell you this so many times, but we had college kids, we got sick, we were doing it after the model, and then we never did. I'm doing it now. I would love to do it with anybody, and I'd love to do it with staff especially. But so let me do one more thing, a few more things. The question we have for you is, the concept plan offers nothing specific relating to a life cycle analysis and/or climate metrics. It's only hoping to be found after the law is law. And the requirements of the ANSI GBI 01-2021, the Green Globes Assessment Protocol, and the LEED version 4.1 building design of the proposed green building section of your law language are just guidelines. If you read them, it said there's disclaimers on all of these things. There are guidelines with a zero guarantee, just a zero guarantee, and nothing specific or measurable. The references are assessment tools in your green section. You say we have to look at all these things. Well, they're assessment tools. They're not mandatory and do not contain mandatory requirements for conformance, but recommend, I'm going to go to LEED, go to the LEED, hang on. LEED 4.1. Here's what is recommended in LEED 4.1, although this guy has to use it, he hasn't used it yet. It says LEED, a prerequisite, integrative project planning and design. As early as practical, this is in the LEED section that you say is in our code.
Can you say what LEED is for people?
Leadership in environmental engineering design. It is nothing more than, well, it's I'll tell you what it is in a minute. As early as practical and preferably before schematic design, which is way too late because they already did schematic design. Conduct a minimum 4-hour integrated design charrette with a project team. The goal is to optimize the integration of green strategies across all aspects of the building, the design, construction, and operations. LEED is a rating system only, a scorecard for design, construction, and I would say operations and performance. of green buildings designed to measure and subsequently reduce the ecological cost of emissions in a new building. Now, wait, nobody's done that. Another lead thing was, it was developed to reduce emissions and generate a process that makes construction and new building design greener. The practice has been abandoned by many builders and architects as too cost prohibitive. But we're asking the guy to do it, and we're not telling the guy to do it. And by the way, you could go on to US Green Building Council and the website and look up what is LEED. It's www.usbgc.org/help/what/need. LEED. All right, let me, just a minute, I'm still not done, almost done, and please, I hope you're getting the idea that we've been talking of a lot of everything except the environment. And if this is an environmental code, we better start talking about the environment. I wish I would have said that first. B. Okay, now, and here's your part. Lead 4.1 building design of the proposed law's green language are just zero recommendations, guidelines, and no guarantees, and do not conform to any mandatory requirements and don't have to. They're just guidelines. However, it's recommended and can be prescribed by the jurisdiction, that's you. At best, the LEED certification of silver, gold, or platinum, there's 4 of them, certified. LEED, you get a plaque you put on the wall and it tells you what kind of great job you did at saving the planet. Well, you could be certified, you could be silver, gold, or platinum. Or with the ANSI GBI 01-2021 Green Globe Assessment, they have globes. You could get 1 globe or 2 globes or 3 globes, or your building could have 4 globes. And that would give us, at least, if you picked how many globes you want this thing to be, if you picked how many LEED certifications, platinum, gold, certified, silver, if you picked any one of those in those 2 categories, LEED or then at least it would give us the expectation of, if not the reduction of carbon emissions, what the code is really for. I think that's all. And I would really be disappointed if you didn't call up your building inspector and your town engineer to have a meeting with us or anybody on your board that you designate to talk a little bit more about how in the world do we make sure that we get performance, environmentally friendly performance out of this project, especially since that's your goal.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Sabrina?
Can I say something? Is that possible?
Before you go there, Don, I wanted to just hear from Sabrina whether if you could talk about the kind of binding environment or not, what's in the legislation.
I don't want anybody to be misled. The NG special permit legislation requires an applicant to comply with our existing green building code. It requires them to go above and beyond that green building code, which does reference LEED certification or other equivalent certification. It requires them to minimize operational carbon emissions, and it requires a heightened energy standard that goes above and beyond the energy requirements of today. So, with all due respect, this building is required to is being held to a higher green building standard and energy efficiency standard than anything that is constructed today. And that's written into the legislation.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Chuck has another comment.
No, but before
well, let me
Dr.
hear Don and then you can come back.
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to say for the community, that's really why I'm here, because as I've said many times, I am not the developer, and I am not the architect, I'm not the engineer, and I'm not the planner. I really consider myself the conscience of the project. The reason why we went to Gray and Organsky was because they have a reputation. Asa Gray and Alan Organsky are leaders in the field of green construction. They have built a complete net zero building, at least one in New Haven, a school which has gotten a tremendous number of awards. They're in the midst of building an apartment building that's going to be net zero. They are advisors to the government of Bhutan about net zero construction. So reputationally, we have done everything we can to seek out people who not only can build this way, but are sympathetic and desire to build this way and are leaders in the field. That doesn't gainsay anything that Chuck said, any of the things he raised, but I think I want the community to know that we tried, by looking at the various people we could work with, to find people who believed in this kind of project and could make it work. I can't speak to any of the things that Chuck said about gallons of water or concrete. That is something that professionals have to do, but I really want the community to understand that we have brought on board the people that we think really can speak to these issues and make them happen. And that assuaged my feelings about possibility. Chuck, I'll just say one more thing. I built a net zero house for ourselves, so we believe in it. We're trying to do this in order to make it happen. One of the last things, that gentleman talked about solar. We've said since the beginning that we want to have solar. The only issues that we've were very frank about was how to make a green roof and a solar roof work best together. They can do that, but that has to be actually engineered out, and it hasn't been engineered out based on the pitch of the roof and the direction of the roof. But we have included solar, I just want to say that. So thank you for at least hearing about Gray and Organsky.
Great, thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Chuck?
Yeah. There is a thing called preliminary concept design plan, PD, whatever, we've seen that. All I'm asking for is a preliminary carbon design plan. And you get that by looking at a thing called life cycle analysis. And if Organsky has done this before, he's done a life cycle analysis. And he submitted to us a design plan. I would like him to submit to us his carbon plan. It's that simple. And good or bad, I don't know. But I think as part of a carbon code, we should have a carbon design plan before we pass the code.
I mean, I guess that would be one thing if the legislation's passed and they're moving to, you know.
No, it has to be part of it.
If they're moving to the next stage, they couldn't demonstrate compliance, I guess, with the legislation without
Look,
something
you're
like
writing a
just
climate
mentioned.
code, and in that climate code, you say, okay, show me what you got before we have to have. We're building a code around the forms of a design concept of a building. We have to build a code around the emissions that building is going to create. So I want to know what the emissions are, and I think if I were on that board, I wouldn't do anything until I knew what was going on, because this whole idea of a climate code might be out of issue. The other thing is, Sabrina says, yeah, we've got. I really like the chapter C, the appendix CC, because it clearly says you can't use fossil fuel for your electricity. It's pretty clear. But the other two aren't very clear. There are all kinds of variables within each one of those things, LEED or green globes. But it's vague and not at all predictable. So you have to make it a little more predictable. I do believe if you did a full assessment of what's going on and how this thing is in emitting emissions, that you'd be able to pick the kind of part of that code that you want to put in your code. You might want just one globe out of the green globe thing, and you might want to just certify it LEED. You don't need all that other crap. By the way, all that other stuff, not the LEED 4, I mean, you could get tax credits for it. You're not going to get it in this building, not with that foundation. So it's so simple. They have companies, you have a traffic consultant, I want an environmental consultant to do a preliminary carbon concept design plan. That's all, preliminary, just to see where we are.
Thank you. All right, before we get to kind of repeat, I just wanna see, is there anyone here who has not spoken who would like to speak? Okay, and is there anyone online who has not yet spoken, obviously, who would like to speak?
No hands are raised.
No hands are raised. Okay, Kent, sorry.
Just a point of clarification to Vicky's question, as far as being net zero carbon operating, not net zero carbon life cycle. Because we talked about the embodied carbon, and there's a boatload of embodied carbon here that's not being mitigated. Okay, so that's what we were talking about. And I kind of find, I can't necessarily refute it, but Sabrina's comment that this is the most energy efficient building, or exactly, I'm not sure exactly what her words were. I think there's probably a lot more energy efficient buildings around that have been produced than this one. But it's a good step, it's going in the right direction, and it's doing pretty well, but I don't think the superlative is accurate. So.
Thank you.
Just have a few points.
Thank you, Val, that's good.
Okay, the first one is I'd like to remind the board that the immediately uphill property next to 50 North Greeley, 136 North Greeley, has already been designated as possibly contaminated with a variety of volatile organic compounds. That's what DEC records show. DEC records also indicate a brownfield cleanup application has been filed on that site. And this is immediately, for lack of, it's up gradient or uphill. The report we put in shows that the stormwater and the groundwater goes down from 136 through 150 and into the watershed. I believe it is not true that the property, if identified as contaminated, could not be sold. Conifer was sold. And New York State taxpayers paid for all the remediation there. So this property could be sold. And it could be all affordable housing, and New York State's taxpayers could pay for it. Some people would like that, some people won't, but that's a reality. That property has value. Holly, you asked about the homeowners in Maple and Bischoff. Frankly, seeker requires more than fingers crossed on this. Seeker requires you to look at reasonable long-term and short-term consequences. There's been no study of traffic there, and you had a resident come in and say what the reality is. I think that the negative declaration indicating is blank on this, and it's incomplete for that reason alone. Also, there was a comment that 50 North Greeley is not using the parking spaces adjacent to the property, so the fire department recommendation doesn't matter. Well, the merchants there are using them. The merchants there already feel that ever since the parking lot and Rite Aid was closed off to people parking, they are suffering from lack of parking. People are late to appointments. I've heard this directly from merchants. So you eliminate, I don't understand the idea that those spaces don't matter. They're relied on in the parking study. And remember, we're putting in a parking letter. It's going to be ready shortly, and a follow-up on the flooding, and also further comments from the community. But my point is that merchants there need those spaces. There's, depending on how many you eliminate, there's 10 to 16 spaces on the west side of North Greeley. The parking study counts those spaces. I mean, if they're not there, it has an impact. It has an impact to people who live there, to people who work there, to people who are shopping. And also, one thing that the building doesn't have, it has 0 visitor parking. The current town code has various provisions for visitor parking in different types of categories, requiring 10 to 20% of the on-site parking be added for visitor parking. There's no visitor parking for this. That's an obvious additional stressor on local parking spaces. So the idea that it doesn't matter about the fire department spaces being eliminated is just wrong. Also on the power lines, I recall Ed saying that the law says yes, certain power lines have to be buried, but he said something about it's not the power lines around the property, it's the power lines from the street, whether that impacts the fire department. So in other words, not all power lines are required to be buried under law. I just want to clarify that. I'm not clear, obviously, on which ones he was talking about, but he did make that point when somebody asked. So those are my follow-up points. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other public comments from anyone here? Okay, any online?
No hands are raised.
Okay. Anything anyone on the town board would like to add? Or ask? Sabrina, anyone else? Okay, so
I have one thing to add, you have my phone number, right?
come.
I just want to be sure you have my phone number so we could arrange a meeting with your staff. Do you want me to give it to you or do you have it?
Not on record.
We have your
Oh, yeah,
number, but you
okay.
feel free to give it to Jill if you'd like to.
You got my number, Jill.
Dates, Chuck.
Okay, so I guess the next step here, well, do you wanna tell us about them? I'll let you tell us. I know what it is, but I'll let you tell us.
The next step is for the board to consider, if you've heard all public comment, from the, you can close the public hearing, you have a choice to leave the public hearing open and continue the public hearing to another date, that would be one option. You also have the option to close the public hearing and allow additional written public comments to be provided for a certain period of time, or close the public hearing without any additional time for further public comment, which would preclude the public from submitting any further documentation. So that's the next step, and then you have to consider if the negative declaration that's been provided as revised, if the planning department in my office determines to address some of these issues, then a revised resolution could be considered at a later date. So, or we could be directed to further revise the negative declaration, prepare resolutions with respect to the negative declaration, so.
So one additional question I just wanna ask you, we heard from council previously that if we pass this legislation for a special permit, does not mean that anyone else can sort of pick it up and demand that it be used on their property. Do you concur with that? Do you disagree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
No, 100%. I've reviewed this issue. I reviewed the memorandum that has been prepared internally. I've looked at the issues. We've had this issue many times. A zoning change is completely discretionary for the board, and if somebody else came forward and said, "Oh, I'm demanding that you make the same zoning changes for another property," look, you've demonstrated there are unique circumstances here, and even if there are some similar circumstances, this board has the absolute discretion to deny or reject or not even consider another zone change for another property, 100%, without really being subject to any challenge, unless there was some clear discriminatory intent against somebody based on on some protected class. So yes, I'm confident that this is not something that another property owner could then come forward and say, "Oh, I'm entitled to this relief for this type of zoning legislation on our property because you granted it for the 50 North Greeley property."
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Alright, so without any more public comment here tonight, I'm gonna kind of propose that we close the public hearing, kind of split the baby as Eric just described, and leave it open for a week for further written comments. And then request, as I believe the next step is, that legal counsel prepare draft resolutions for a negative declaration. And my thought with this is not that input isn't valued. My thought is that I believe that we've reached a point where we've kind of thoroughly examined this, debated its merits, and taken into account a ton of invaluable feedback. And to me, closing the public hearing is not about shutting out resident voices, but it's just about allowing us to transition to the next phase of this journey, whether it's voted in favor or against. We have to close the public hearing in order to move it on. So, for months, we've listened to resident voices and engaged in extensive discussions with experts, stakeholders, and our citizens. We've taken into account a myriad of opinions and suggestions that are presented during the course of the public hearing. I think the time has come for us to do what we were entrusted to do. And some things that were brought up is that the building as proposed is gonna add 20% affordable and workforce housing, which is double the current requirement. I think we brought that up. And things that this board has certainly examined, and I believe that the longer we prolong this public hearing, the more we risk delaying any benefits that this building can bring to our community and, potentially lose any of them, as well as be subject to what, Governor Hochul may propose in the future that we must do with that property. And it's been subject to a lot of scrutiny. I think, Sabrina certainly has looked at it significantly, as well as many of our residents. We've looked at environmental impact assessments and a lot, again, of public input. And we will continue to work tirelessly to address any lingering concerns in the site planning process, which would be the next step that, again, can't go through unless the board approves it. So I urge my fellow board members to just consider the broader perspective. I think the point of a public hearing is to engage in a thorough and inclusive process. I think we've done that. I believe people in this town are passionate and we could all talk forever about every issue. I don't know that I've heard much that hasn't already been presented to us before today, that's new and different. It's certainly some, most of it and all of it we've considered either before today or even at tonight's public meeting. So I would propose that we consider closing the public hearing, but leaving it open for written comments for another week. And then consider the legislation just to discuss it, not to vote on it at our next meeting, and then at our work session, and then move forward from there as to our next steps, whether we still feel we need more information, whether we wanna vote on it, whether if we did feel we needed more information and wanted to then reopen a public hearing because there's additional information that's been discovered, we can do that as well. But I think at this point, we should consider moving to the next step. And then we can make that decision as to our timing. It doesn't bind us to any sort of timing.
So I just wanna say I appreciate everyone on every side of this debate. And I do think that we've done a great job of keeping public comment open and giving our residents an opportunity to come and share their thoughts, their feelings, and their concerns. This is our first public hearing since we have the secret determination, and I was really interested to hear what might flow from that. So I just wanna say, I know that there are residents who have spent money and time to have an expert talk about floodplain, an expert talk about parking. And given the fact that we have a very passionate group of residents that have spent their time and their money to do that, I'm personally not prepared to close the public hearing at this time, given that Maggie had said that she wanted to submit memos to us. I think as concerned residents, they should have the opportunity to submit those documents to the town board, because what might come from those documents might lead to more public comment. And so I just wanna make sure that our residents have the opportunity to give the town board that information. Maggie made a great point that the secret determination came out over a holiday weekend, that they haven't had a lot of time. And I just wanna make sure our residents feel that we are giving everyone an opportunity to share their concerns. So at this point, I am not prepared to close the public hearing.
That's fair. Maggie, do you know when you're gonna get that information? Do you have any timeline? And that could be submitted in writing, I assume.
Yes, but I would like people to read our letters, and I'd like people to come forward and make comments. It may seem like a small point, but parking's very important to people. And that letter I expect to have submitted by the end of the week, and I expect that the follow-up from about the flood to be sometime next week, and I have some further comments that I personally have to write. I'd also like to say that people should be told that the hearing's gonna close. I mean, this is just a
Well, we
practice.
did, I mentioned it, that we would consider it at the last meeting.
You said that it was up to you, you'd close it, but there was not.
No, I said we'd consider it.
Consider it, but that's not the same. And, you know, people should be told it is gonna close, or whatever the date is, I don't know, on September 26th, your last chance to speak out. We'll have the stuff up online, we'll have it to you, people can read it, and it may impact your seeker, and I hope it impacts your seeker. I mean, that's what we're doing here. And we can get out that people come, you know, now or never, but they should be told that it's closing. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to say what I think about closing the public hearing. So the reason that we have a public hearing is to genuinely listen to the public in order to take information that we don't quite know yet and incorporate that into our thinking and perhaps into the legislation that we're looking to approve. We are entrusted with representing our residents and doing what is best for our community, and that's what we're entrusted with doing. So I think we've had some significant new information regarding environmental issues, regarding contamination, regarding the net zero aspect of the project, which goes directly to the actual language of the legislation. And if we change that, then the public has the right to, make comments at a public hearing regarding the, different legislation. So what we've heard today regarding the net zero issue may or may not change the legislation. I don't think we have enough information to know that. But that in and of itself would necessitate keeping the public hearing open. And that's not even considering the contamination issues, which I'm curious about, and I don't think we have enough information on, and even if it's found to be not accurate, Maggie, I think we have a responsibility to look into it. And it's too soon.
That's the point behind it.
Yeah, this is why we have public hearings. It's to genuinely take in new information. So, I could go on and on, but I think this is reason enough at this point to keep the public hearing open.
With regard to this is just me and I'm just talking about it in front of the board. With regard to a potential contamination, I actually, and I hear what you're saying, it's certainly conceivable that there could be contamination on that property or any other property in the downtown. I just don't understand, and maybe Sabrina, you can tell me, how that would impact whether or not we vote for a project to go forward, because, and before you make a face, I'm gonna explain to you why I'm saying that, is because that has to be done, right? Once they start digging into the ground, they have to determine if there is anything that needs to be mitigated. And if there is something that needs to be mitigated, it must be done and it must be cleaned up in accordance with state environmental standards. So to me, that potential contamination is there whether there's a development there or not. And so that whether it goes forward or not, that remains there. And if it does go forward and it's determined that there isn't contamination, because that's the time when you would determine it, then great. And if it goes forward and there is contamination, then it must be mitigated before anything can move on. So to me, that issue is not dispositive of a decision here, because no matter what, it's going to be fine or it's going to end up being fine because either it's there, it's not there, or it is there and it needs to be mitigated. So to me, that's always gonna happen. But that's just me, and maybe I'm not hang on one second, maybe I'm not understanding that correctly, but that's not gonna make a decision for me, because I think that needs to be dealt with no matter what. Unless nothing is done to the property at all, and then they don't have to mitigate whatever might be there, and we would never know. So I don't know if I'm not understanding that, but to me, whether or not it may be contaminated is not gonna be a decision marker for me because it would need to be cleaned up no matter what before anything could move forward.
I think the most important point, though, there is no known contamination today. And that is based on all the information that has been received today, there's still no contamination on the site. There are certain steps that are taken as we move along in the development process. The applicant has confirmed that. So if there is discovery of contamination in the future, it will be addressed. They'll continually be looking to make sure that everything is clean. Nothing that has been submitted in regards to the condition of the site has changed based on the information we received from the public.
So I'm going to support, I think Lisa's still supporting to close the public hearing and keep it open for written comment. I don't think that we've necessarily learned anything new. I think we've heard you and some of the same things. We've heard repeatedly about contamination that we have heard does not exist from our town staff, whom I believe, not blindly so, but I believe. We heard things about an example about contamination from a dry cleaner as an example 5 miles away, so therefore theoretically anything within that 5 mile radius would be contaminated, but there's no evidence of contamination. And to Lisa's point, and to what Sabrina seemed to indicate it is nothing can move forward without an examination of that soil once it's inspected, for lack of a better term, that if it's determined that there is in fact contamination, that has to be remediated. I don't think there's anyone in this community, whether in the town board or elsewhere, that would agree to move forward with contaminated soil or whatever it may be without remedying it. I think that is a ridiculous conclusion, but at the same time we have to base our decisions in the actual evidence and not speculation. We heard some arguments about 40% or 60% of the community doesn't support this. That's not necessarily what seeker is about, although it's certainly relevant to decision making in terms of what we decide to do. Although I certainly have not seen 40 to 60% of the community come here in any way, shape, or form, whether by email, text, phone call, or coming before us to indicate that they don't support this. You could argue that the form-based code had a lot more, and certainly did, disapproval, but nothing like we're dealing with here. I repeatedly heard the term that seemed to be the big issue about the building being too big. Indirectly, that's certainly part of SECRA, the view shed and its impact on the community. But I think that there is going to be site plan, let me rephrase that, there in fact will be site plan review of a lot of the things that were stated. And at some point, we can close our hearing. And I appreciate that there are people who want to bring more evidence in and more opposition in. I do believe that not everyone wants to see anything built there. I think some people want to see 3 stories built there. I think some people want to see 5 stories, and some people probably want to see more. But what we have is imperfect, but imperfect should not stop what I think is the right direction for our community. But we're not even there yet, because we still have another step before we get to that point. So I do support the closing of the public hearing, keeping it open for comment, written comment to whatever time is appropriate. If we learn new information, to reopen that hearing, and that can still be provided based on the experts that you say we'll be hiring. But based on the letter that you provided, based on the responses from Sabrina and town staff, I am comfortable with moving forward with a negative declaration, or pardon me, closing the public hearing for the purpose of determining by the town board whether or not to vote a negative declaration.
Can I mention one thing, Neil? I'm just curious about what you think about this. Putting aside the issue of contamination, because I get that argument. What about the fact that, and I do believe that the owner, Don Feinberg, is really sincere about wanting to create something that's really innovative and sustainable. What about the aspect of looking at the net zero aspect of the legislation? Because that's in large part why we're doing this. And looking at what we've learned today regarding that aspect of net zero, and perhaps having to change the legislation to accommodate that a little more. So wouldn't that require, if we change the legislation in a substantive way, and this is for our attorney, really, wouldn't that require us to maintain this hearing
You
open?
would have to have a
So-
public hearing if there are
So I would say
material
let's put aside the issue of the contamination, which I think is an important issue, but putting that aside for a moment, what about that aspect of it? I mean, we want this to be net zero. Don Feinberg, I believe, really wants this to be net zero as well. And I'd be interested in looking at aspect of the legislation that we should be changing in order to achieve that, and working with him and working with our SAB to make sure that we're doing the best we can for our environment and to be true to this net zero label that we really care about. So I don't wanna get too distracted from that issue as well. I'm just curious.
Can I answer that too?
Certainly, you wanna go ahead and I'll answer, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, you go first.
I think that's somewhat, I think as a principle, it's absolutely a valid point you're making. However, that being said, again, I'll go back to what I just said moments ago. It may be imperfect, it may not be exactly to the exact dot, to the exact what we're requesting, because we know it can be a little bit different. But I think there are so many other principles that are here that we support as a community, and it sounds a little silly, net 5, net 10 as opposed to net 0. I'm not suggesting anything other than wanting to achieve the best, but at some point you have to say you need to move that proverbial ball forward. And there are so many things that we've been able to potentially secure, such as we discussed, affordable and workforce and different types of units. At this point in time, we're looking solely at secret. I know to the point you just asked about council, if it determines you wanna make a tweak to ensure that net zero, that we'd have to reopen the hearing. Well, you know what, we're gonna learn more information because we're keeping it open for written comment, and if that means even longer than a week or 2 weeks to get the written comment in from those experts in terms of what they're looking at, then we'll make that determination when we get there. We can always circle back, but I think we need to move this forward. I think it's imperfect, but that doesn't mean it's not a good, positive thing for the community. It doesn't mean it's not a good, positive thing for the environment, because even if you're building a 3-story building there, you're still gonna have to have the pile issues, and maybe not as much. You're still gonna have to do the exact same things on a smaller scale. So, we're at the stage where I believe we need to move forward. It's the right thing to do, and we're not foreclosing listening to everybody. We've heard a lot, and we'll continue to hear more.
And just to add on to what Jeremy said, I think that closing the public hearing doesn't mean we can't still consider the legislation, which we will. And what Sabrina said is that the environmental provisions that we have put in there are far beyond anything we've ever done before, and they're certainly more than our green code right now. And if I heard Kent correctly and Chuck, I don't think it's possible right now, unless you're building maybe a tree house, to do something that's actually net zero. I don't think that construction materials are to the point where it's even possible. So I think, to Jeremy's point, this is such a huge step though to get us something that we can be really proud of from at least an environmental perspective. And if it turns out that as we're reviewing this in the next number of weeks, we want to make substantive changes to the legislation, we're actually required by law to reopen the public hearing. If it's a comma here and there, 1 or 2 little insignificant changes, we don't have to reopen it. But if we have significant changes to the legislation, we actually must reopen it. It's not even a question. So but I don't know that we're ever gonna get someplace not now, maybe in 10 years, and there's always new ways of doing things that are being developed. I think eventually there will be a greater potential for even I don't know what's beyond net zero, but further than we can take it now. But I think that this is a great step, and according to Sabrina, it's been written in such a way that it really is something we can be proud of from an environmental perspective. And I think we heard that tonight as well. Hang on, I wanna hear if Holly wants to.
Before I start, did you looked like you wanted to insert
No,
something.
I'm just, no,
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. So I won't bury the lead. I'm ready to close the public hearing. But for these reasons, I don't think that there's any minds changing right now. I think we're talking about new information that might come, and I very much appreciate that and want to give our community time to listen to today, react, and for us to get these additional reports and make an assessment. So I feel like a week of written comment is not enough. I would like to extend that. I don't know if there are any guidelines as far as how we can, but I mean I feel like at least 2 weeks would make me feel like that will give people time to react, it'll give us time to react, and then if we get information that we need to reopen it, I think we cross that bridge when we come to it.
I would ask for 3 weeks to get beyond the Jewish holidays.
3 weeks is fine with me. I don't I think 3 weeks is.
I don't know what the Jewish holidays have to do with it, honestly, and I'm Jewish and
What
I,
it has to do with it, Lisa, is getting people to pay attention. There's a lot of stressors on the family. I'm Jewish too, actually. And there's a lot of stressors on the family, and I gotta get the reports out there. I just told you one report won't be out till next week. Then there's Yom Kippur, and I want people to pay attention and think about it and get comments in.
Yeah, I mean I don't know that 1 to 3 weeks when we've been talking about this for this long is gonna make a big difference, and I wanna make sure that people do have time to get caught up, and if there are people who don't realize that we're approaching this stage, I want them to find out. So so I'm 3 weeks, I say. I understand the question about the contamination, and while that is absolutely a scary thing to think about potentially being there, right now I don't see any evidence to say that would change our declaration when it comes to seeker. If we get new information when they start building, or then that will happen then, and I know that they're going to address it. And I just think at this point it's time for us to move forward, take the next step. I would love to have a perfect net zero of embodied carbon and operating carbon, but honestly that's a lofty and probably unachievable goal within a reasonable time frame right now. So if there's anything that Sabrina and council's heard that makes them say we can tighten up the legislation with some tweaks, I'm open to hearing about that, but I think it's time to take the next step.
okay, so then,
Can I please?
yes, you
Can I
can.
offer something? Actually, this applicant has talked about alternative materials to concrete and concrete mixtures, so it's not 100% carbon based. They have talked about the exploratory nature of concrete substitutes, that they would look into all of that as part of developing this project, but there's just not a proved out science as to whether or not a non-concrete, a concrete substitute as far as a foundation can withhold a building. So, but they are open to employing as much carbon-free material as they can in constructing this building. And I wanna remind the board that they did commit to that in your discussions with them.
Thank you.
That's a little more blue sky, because it says here, the enzymatic construction materials contain a strength of, I don't even know what 12 MPa is, compared to a strength of Portland cement, which is 20 to 40 MPa. This results in being unsuitable for large apartments. This is all about low carbon concrete. These are the facts. You wanna look it up, it's at dreamcivil.com/carbon success, or SUC, I don't know, ... Anyway, I'll start again. What are the disadvantages of low carbon concrete? The results in it, it's being unstable for large apartments or construction. It can only be utilized for projects that want a lower load, like a side of a building. So let's put that to bed for now, as well as all the other stuff, and really look at what the only thing missing here, the only thing that's not perfect is a perfect process that looks at everything. And it says here in your deck that you have to minimize embodied carbon in building products. All buildings greater than 5,000 must perform properly. And the whole idea of this whole code is to minimize carbon. And the only thing that's not perfect is that you guys haven't looked at that enough. And if you could have closed this meeting without looking at it, I'm telling you, that is a little bit short-sighted.
Okay, thank you. So I know I had proposed 1 week, which I'm thinking now is too short. How would we be with 2? I know you said 3, you were good with 1, what do we think about splitting it?
I have no issue whether it's 2 or 3 weeks, it's
I just wanna look at a calendar.
There's one right there on the wall.
Hey, can I give you guys 3 weeks to redo the secret process?
October 3rd is 3 weeks. Tuesday, October 3rd, please.
You know, we don't have a meeting October 10th and then I would happily do 2, but
I'm explaining why 2
And-
doesn't work, and we're.
but I thought you said we'd have all that information and
No, I said that they would be done, and I wanna get it out to the community, so the community can read it and put in comments if they feel that they want to.
so
Why wouldn't you wanna do it for 3 weeks? What's the
What's the
problem?
big deal? I don't get it.
I just think there's always something that's gonna come up and I think that it's something we're gonna have to consider, those comments and whether we get people who say, I agree, there might be, you know, contamination on the site.
No,
We already know that information.
No, that's not, no. And I got further comments to put in from community comments about what clearly your mind's closed on this, Lisa, I agree with Suzanne, but there are people who wanted to say other things. I got in what I could by the 5th, and I intend to put in more.
So my mind is not closed, Maggie, it's just that, to Jeremy's point, we've been hearing comments for months now and I'm wondering, are we actually gonna hear anything that's
Well, their
different
comments,
from
their
what we've
comments,
already heard?
you might.
Can I ask the council how we proceed here, because we don't have a unanimous vote on closing the public hearing. So would we vote on that first and then vote on how long the written comment
You
would
can
be,
certainly
just so
vote
that we
on
can?
whether to close and then take a separate vote on if you were leaving it open for
Because there
public
seems to be
comment, how
disagreement on
long
that
to leave
too.
it open for, that's perfectly
Well,
acceptable.
cause if we're gonna close though, we wanna make sure that it's open for written comments,
Right.
so it's closed for these kind of
Right.
meetings, but everyone
Close
still,
Close
and
for oral,
then
yeah.
to Maggie's point, then people know exactly when it's ending, which is why we always, unless it's something really easy like the ones we did earlier today, we always leave it open for written comments, so people at some point you have to close in person, but we always leave it open for written comments, so people know this is my, you know, drop dead date, my last date, I can put in comments.
I can say that it's not typical for the board to announce that it will be closing oral public comment at the next hearing. That's not something that's typically done, but
Right.
you would leave it open so that exactly for that purpose, if there are members of the public that wanna put in those last comments, they can do it in a written format, and the board does have to consider those when making its determination. I think I mean, it would probably make more sense for the board to try to come to an agreement on the amount of time. It seems like there is a 3-2 vote to close the public hearing, it's just the matter of time that we're talking about, so probably best to just try to work through it and come up with a consensus on what's the appropriate amount of time, so.
If I can just bring to the board's attention, so 3 weeks would in fact be October 3rd. We don't have a meeting the week of October 10th, and October 17th is our budget hearings. So we don't normally have anything else on the agenda those meetings. So when you're thinking about additional public comments coming through, the other thing that Lisa had mentioned was directing council and staff to take and prepare the resolutions, so that's something else that would be discussed during that time. So I just wanna bring it to the board's attention that it's not just the comments, it's the other discussions along the way. So I don't know if that's something that the board is gonna feel that one meeting is, if you do it for the third, that all of that is gonna be discussed and you know, and ironed out, or if you think maybe the resolutions or things of that nature might be something you wanna consider 2 weeks out. And then still save the comments for the third week.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean we can't
No,
consider
of course. And you
this.
can absolutely push it down if you need to, or you know, consider anything else, but just so that you have some time.
I still feel good about 3 weeks, honestly.
Jeremy?
I mean, I have no issue with 2 weeks with the possibility of 3, so I mean, if there's a holdout for 3, I think that just like unfortunately or fortunately, depending which side you fall on, that's what it's gonna be. If you're not willing to do 2, then we'll have to go with 3, but I would just say to consider 2 because it'll allow us some movement, whereas 3 will then really slow this down significantly. And we have the opportunity, if there's something really new and something that really changes our mind and something that is really valuable and our town staff says, yes, we were wrong, or this is something we didn't look at and it's incorrect, we can then still take that next step and keep it going. And so, but if not, then I think that we should close the public, be done. So
Can we
I think 2
decide?
weeks is sufficient for that question, and if it remains open, we can keep it open longer.
But Jeremy, I wanna make sure that as those comments, especially these reports, are received and added to our public record, that other community members have the opportunity to digest that themselves and submit written comments. I wanna provide for that time because I don't want them to come into the meeting on the 3rd and
That's fair, but my response in part to that is that there's been so much opportunity for this in some capacity, in some way, and we're hearing 40%, 60% of the community's against us. It's contaminated. This has been going on for months and months and months and months and months. And it's not as if, you know, listen, I can't tell you how much Rush has or doesn't have in terms of money, but you know, there's had the opportunity to examine this. We haven't seen the people coming in saying, we object to this, hundreds of people that supposedly have said, we object, we have issues. Where are they? We haven't seen it in an email, we haven't seen it in a phone call, we haven't seen any of that. But that said, that's not the issue before us. The issue is whether or not this is sufficient now and we can have the negative declaration. And I think we're at that point. I don't think we should preclude anyone from providing that extra information. But then it's gonna be another extra information, and then another extra information. And at some point, you just have to have the courage to say, I think it's enough. I believe it's enough, I'm relying on town staff's determination, but if something changes our mind in those 2 weeks, then we can keep it open more, that's my position. But if I'm not putting the stress too much on you, but if you're waiting to 3 weeks, then it is what it is.
And I will say, and I appreciate that Rush has taken the expense to do this, but if Sabrina is telling us and FEMA is telling us that it's not in a flood zone, if one person comes and says, no, it is, this has been studied before as well. I'm not sure any resident is gonna be able to say, oh, well, that guy said it is, well, then it must be in a flood zone. I think if we're hearing that it's not, under secret rules, it's not in a flood zone.
No, not secret rules.
I don't know.
So I don't have any reason to think that our declaration is gonna be wrong, but I don't see any reason not to give the community 3 weeks.
It's an extra 7 days.
We're talking about a
But
week.
it's not an extra 7 days.
Why?
Because then it's about an extra month before we can even look at it.
Can we just vote on?
Is it, well, is there a meeting on the 3rd? Is that what?
There is a meeting on the 3rd.
So
We could.
the one thing that the board needs to consider is when these reports come in, you know, the staff does need some time to look at them, but you know, and consider them in order to incorporate them. So, you know, that should be taken into account as well, and you know.
Well, right, which is why we need to give them time to end public comment so that staff has time to look at everything, otherwise.
Staff doesn't have time to look at them before we end the public comment?
Not that before you
No,
have the
because
discussion,
you could get
right.
a
Okay,
you know,
okay.
Before you have the
regarding
discussion.
to prepare the resolutions, make revisions to any to, you know, the negative declaration based on those documents.
So not to wait, so
Close to the 29th.
so not to go back and forth, because we can go on this forever and everyone's tired. If 3 weeks is 3 weeks, then it is what it is. But I would just encourage you to reconsider 2, to keep it open for the possibility of 3, but if not, well, then let's just move this ball forward one way or
That
another.
doesn't really help me. I would prefer certainty of 3 weeks. I would sincerely request it, by the way.
Can we
What
do-
if-
how about the 29th?
What if
That's
we
somewhere in the
split
middle.
the difference
That's fine.
and
I
made
mean,
it
this
the
is silly.
29th?
We're
I
talking
think that's
about a
that's a
number
good
of a
idea.
few days. I
Okay,
think this
let's
is
do
still
the
I think the
29th.
29th
But if it's
gives,
for staff, I think it's.
Then it gives everyone a few days before the next meeting to digest it and
It's a
look at it.
compromise.
29th.
2.5
The
weeks.
reports before that, it's for the community to read the reports and get in by the 3rd. You're gonna have the reports by next week, all right, both of them.
the 29th.
Oh, so if we'll have both reports
But I
by
want
next
the
week.
But I want the community to take in what the reports say
Okay,
and
then
make comments, so I'm saying, let's keep it at the 3rd, so
I think then if we're gonna have everything next week, I think 2.5 weeks is probably good then, to your point, that Friday, ended on Friday at
That's
5 p.m.
There's no holiday in there, right?
The 29th is not a holiday.
it would makes it
I have
it
no
makes more
objection to the
sense,
29th.
it makes more sense for me to have it
There
on
is a holiday,
Tuesday
there
the
is
3rd.
Rosh Hashanah.
I'm
Rosh
Rosh
on the
Hashanah's on
29th.
Friday.
Is this Friday and Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
Right, but Holly was asking, is there a holiday in that span of time?
Well, I meant like is the 29th
She meant it's the
or
29th.
the
Oh, the
Monday,
29th,
if
right,
if one of those were a holiday.
It gives me
It's not.
one more Saturday to be at the farmer's market trying to get the word out. This is one of the things, this is one of the main mechanisms which you're well aware of.
I will also make sure to put in the town newsletter that if anyone has any further comments, to make sure that they let us know,
I
which
would like
reaches
to
more
hand out
people.
things at the farmer's
I'm
market.
just, I'm prepared to vote to move this forward.
Okay,
I
so
need to
can-
say one more thing, please.
Sure,
Who's this?
Chuck.
Thank you so much.
So I'm asking for the 3rd, please.
And I'm asking a question that your negative deck says, there is no subsurface building structure proposed. And we're talking about underneath the parking lot. I hope, I don't know how many times I'm gonna have to say this thing. And this is, I'm quoting, "It is anticipated that piles will be utilized to support the building, along with any storm water retention that may be required." Those are like swimming pools under there. And then it goes on to say, "Based on the detail provided by the concept plan and the existing site conditions described above, the proposed action and project will not have a significant adverse impact on land." But we already know there's a whole lot of stuff going on under there, and I wanna know how long is it gonna take to change your deck? And is it still negative?
Thank you. Okay, so the motion before the board, vote as you would like.
Is there an answer to that?
I think what that meant to say is there's no parking garage, there's no level that's going under. Of course, every building has to have a foundation.
Oh, you're telling
Unless
me
it's gonna
that
fall-
it's
gonna
not
fall
in,
down.
and not tell,
And Chuck, again, this isn't the end of considerations. We understand what you're saying and we will
I think
definitely
you
look
have to
at it.
look at the significance of all of that embodied carbon in all of that concrete, cause I'm the expert here. Right, I mean, I've done 4 buildings in the middle of town, I know what goes on under there. But long story short, all of that embodied carbon makes a huge difference in the, I guess, sustainability of this building. And I think it would affect the outcome and maybe even the shape and size. So if you're going to ignore what's going on under there, by the way, I just did for nothing with what their engineers didn't have to pay for. I'm telling you what's going on under there. So long story short, there's a whole lot of stuff going under there, and it cannot be said there's no impact. Can't be said. And so if you say it is, then
It's a substantial adverse impact is what it is.
I would
Is
think
their
that's the
standard,
proper
not
word.
any impact, so.
Correct.
Okay, Sabrina, can we just make sure to look at that as well? Just
Lisa, I
revisit it.
recommend that we close the hearing.
Okay.
Can I just ask, we're splitting hairs, what's the difference between September 29th and October 3rd? If a resident that has put a lot of time and effort into this process and weekends and time is asking you for 4 more days, as Holly has said, it's not a problem. Why is it a problem? What is the problem in that? It's such a small give, and it's already one of your board members is fine with it. What's the problem with that? I don't understand. Could you be clear? I mean, the only thing I can see that might be a problem is that she has an extra weekend to talk to residents at the farmer's market, which shouldn't be an issue to the board.
That's not an issue.
Okay, good.
The issue is that I wanna make sure the board has time to consider it, and we have a schedule ahead of us too. I don't know the flip side of it, that the 4 days is necessarily gonna make a difference. We will make sure, and I will say that I will put in big bold letters, come to the farmer's market and come, if you have any further comments, make sure to get it to us. You have 2.5 weeks.
But I would just point out that she's gonna get the information in before then, so you're gonna have information, it's gonna be on a rolling basis. So if you're concerned that it's gonna come all at once at you, it's not. It's really only gonna be a matter of a little.
Saturday because it's Rosh
Because
Hashanah.
we can't consider all the public comments until the hearing is closed.
As Jeremy has pointed out, there haven't been all the public comments, hasn't been as much as maybe there should be. I can't speak to because I don't see it, but I'm saying that some of this material is gonna come to you before this date. And you yourselves, Jeremy is already saying it hasn't been 40 to 60%. So I don't picture one of these, moments where they put like 1,000 letters from Santa on your desk all of a sudden, I don't think that's gonna happen. So you're really not talking about much except accommodating a resident who has put a lot of time and effort into something by 4 days.
No, I totally appreciate that.
No, I have no problem with the 3 days, even though I don't wanna close the public hearing, but if it's the question of how many weeks, I have no problems with the 3 weeks either.
Alright, I think I think the motion before the board is to close the public hearing, leave it open for this is the motion before the board, to close the public hearing, leave it open for public comments until 5 p.m. on September 29th, and direct that legal counsel prepare draft resolutions for a negative environmental declaration for the board to review. That is the motion before the board.
Well, I would like to suggest that we have a different motion and that we separate the closing of the public hearing with how long we
There's a second, there was a second on the motion, so
there was a second.
you can have discussion on the motion now, but there's gonna need to be.
So moved, there was a second?
I think
Oh, you made them,
I
thought Lisa had made the motion, I was sorry.
Am I allowed to make a motion?
Yes.
Oh, so I made that motion.
So I second that motion.
Okay, so can we have a discussion
Yeah.
now at this point? So since there's disagreement about closing the public hearing and disagreement on how long to leave the written portion open, I would suggest that we have 2 motions. One is whether we close the one is to close the public hearing, the other is for how long to leave the written portion open.
I mean, I think you can
Because there's
correct me if I'm wrong,
There's
but that
disagreement on that.
I think that's not how it's usually done. I don't know how the school
There
board
really
used
doesn't
do it,
seem to
but
be a
that's
reason why you would have 2 separate motions on
Right.
that, cause
You said the 29th, right?
at 5 p.m.
you could vote against, if you're opposed to closing the resolution, you would vote against the whole motion and not be concerned with the time to leave it open, and that would be
Right,
the.
but I don't know if someone wants to close the public hearing but wants to leave it open for 3 weeks, then they might wanna vote differently.
Well, I don't
So
think that's
that's
You need to,
that's
you
the
need to,
motion
if the
before us.
supervisor would
Okay,
wanna amend
alright.
her motion, then she could do that. If she wants to call a vote on the motion,
I
there's
think-
been a motion and a second, and call a vote. If it's voted down, then you haven't
Okay, well,
closed it,
people
you
are free to
haven't, and you
vote
can
the way
make
they
another
want.
motion.
Okay,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
nay.
I think 3 weeks is better, nay. I'm sorry guys, but
You proposed 2.5 weeks. Because
Holly,
that gives us
Holly, you don't have
time,
to apologize for
that,
what you
no, you don't have to
want.
apologize, but you had proposed it
fine.
actually based it on your
Whatever it is,
proposal.
it's just.
yeah, I did, but then I heard that
Okay,
I heard
let's
Vicky
just.
and Ally, I thought we could all.
So you can make the second motion then for the 3 weeks if somebody wants to make that motion,
I'd like
since
to
that
make
motion.
the motion for 3 weeks and close public hearing and leave it open for 3 weeks.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
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 Nay, no, but you just voted to
Okay.
close
Oh,
public
sorry,
hearing.
sorry, sorry. Voting nay, sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Wait a minute.
So
Do
what
you
is the
have the
answer?
votes?
I-
what's the answer?
Just wait a second.
It's
It's
the-
for 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Well, actually, do we need to set, actually, I have to amend that motion, just to give that exact date.
October 2nd, 5 p.m.
October 2nd, how about at noon? Which gives them time to get everything and distribute it to us before the meeting,
Okay.
okay? So
I-
the motion
okay,
is to
yeah.
close the public hearing, leave it open for written comments to October 2nd at 12 p.m.
Second,
All in favor?
And directing council to
And
prepare.
directing council to prepare draft resolutions for a negative environmental declaration for us to consider.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye,
Nay.
aye.
okay, thank you.
agenda, please.
All right. So now that public hearing is closed, subject to everything we just did. So now we're gonna move to our consent agenda items. Does anyone have the resolutions?
Yes.
They're missing out.
I move to.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I move to adopt the items 1 through 4 as listed on the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anything else?
Just before we adjourn, on the motions that we had with respect to the sewer district, we closed the public hearing on the sewer district and on the other local law. Can you direct us to you want us to prepare resolutions for the next meeting with respect to
Yes.
approval of those items?
Yes.
I don't know how you normally do local laws,
Normally
if
we
you.
just close the public
Close the
hearing
public hearing
and
and
then
it's
you would
and then
do
we do
those
the resolution.
resolutions
Okay, I
and
just wanted
then we'll consider it at the next meeting.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't, typically vote on them or approve them,
Sometimes, but no.
We can, so if that's the case, our office will prepare those
Yes.
those resolutions approving the local law and the sewer district petition.
Yes.
Alright, so move to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right,
everyone.
thank you, everyone.